Tātad es ceru, ka jūs man dzirdat. Es runāšu latviski tagad sākumā. Un jā, mēs sākam šodien un savu semināru. Labrīt, godātie augstskolu un zinātnisko institūciju pārstāvji, kā arī visi augstākās izglītības un zinātnes jomā strādājošie. Paldies jums, ka esat atraduši laiku, lai pieslēgtos šim tīmekļa semināram, jo šodienas tēma ir aktuāla mums visiem. Jaunas akadēmiskās karjeras ietvaru struktūras vai modeļa izstrāde Latvijā, kas prasīs lielu mūsu visu iesaisti un kopīgu darbu. Bet vispirms par šodienas semināra tehnisko pusi. Tātad semināru vadīšu es, Brigita Kukjalko, Izglītības un zinātnes ministrijas struktūra fonda departamenta vecākā eksperte un Pasaules Bankas ekspertu komandas vadītājs Diego Ambas. Lai arī atrodamies dažādās pasaules un arī Latvijas vietās, šodien savās domās un darbos mēs visi esam Rīgā, Izglītības un zinātnes ministrijā. Seminārs ir sapulcinājis vairāk kā 100 dalībnieku, tātad šobrīd man šķiet, es redzu 84, kas ir pieslēgušies Zoom, bet vēl arī vairāki 10 skatās YouTube. Seminārs ilgs 4 stundas ar 3-10 minūšu ilgiem pārtraukumiem. Tātad, kā jau minēju, seminārs vienlaikus tiek translēts arī Izglītības un zinātnes ministrijas YouTube kontā, kur vēlāk varēs noskatīties arī tā ierakstu. Kā jau pirms paša semināra mēs te mēģinājām un runājām un sazinājāmies savā starpā, Zoom dalībniekiem ir iespēja klausīties runas tulkojumu angļu vai latviešu valodā. Valodu jūs varat izvēlēties Zoom rīkjoslā, ekrāna apakšējā malā, meklējiet interpretation. Tur vajadzētu būt divu valodu iespējām. Tātad, un tulkošanu veids tulces Ingūna Bekere un Marina Pļaviņa. Ņemot vērā, ka semināra laikā tiek nodrošināta šī iespēja klausīties tulkojumu vienā vai otrā valodā, lūdzu ikvienu runātāju apzināties, ka viņa teiktais tiek arī tulkots. Tātad lūdzu nerunājiet pārāk ātri un nelielas pauzes ir pat mazliet vēlamas. Un visiem pārējiem, tātad klausītājiem, lūdzu izslēdziet savus mikrofonus, lai izvairītos no fona trokšņiem. Šobrīd jūsu mikrofoni ir centralizēti, izslēgti, bet pēc prezentācijām mēs lūgsim mūsu tehniķus atslēgt šo te opciju tā, lai jūs varat arī ieslēgt savu mikrofonu un uzdot jautājumu. Tātad šobrīd visiem ir izslēgts, lai nebūtu fona trokšņu, bet vēlāk, kad jau ritēs diskusija, jautājumu atbilžu, uzdošanu, sniegšanu, tad šī te opcija tiks atslēgta. Pats svarīgākais tātad jautājumu uzdošana, to varēs darīt pēc prezentācijām, vai nu rakstot, jūs varat rakstīt tā dēvētajā chat kastītē, tātad arī jūs varat redzēt šo te chat kastīti apakšā rīkjoslā pie Zoom instrumentiem, vai arī varat uzdot to mutiski, bet jums kaut kādā veidā jādara zināms, ka jūs vēlaties uzdot jautājumu vienkārši paceļot roku, vai arī ar opciju raise hand, kuru jūs varat atrast, ja jūs atverat dalībnieku sleju. Ja? Un to dalībnieku sleju jūs savukārt varat atvērt, ja jūs spiežat Zoom ekrāna apakšmalā ogu participants. Ja? Par šīm opcijām mēs vēl ar Diego jums atgādināsim, tā kā tās ir tādas tehniskas lietas, atrisināsim, ja būs kādas problēmas. Jebkurā gadījumā mēs apkoposim visus šodien saņemtos jautājumus un centīsimies sniegt atbildes arī uz tiem jautājumiem, uz kuriem šodien semināra laikā nepagūsim atbildēt. Ja? Un, ja jums ir vēl kādi tehniski jautājumi, tad lūdzu rakstiet šajā te mazajā chat kastītē. Es un mani kolēģi centīsimies jums palīdzēt. Bet tagad turpinām ar semināru programmu un saturu. Vispirms ievadvārdu sadaļa un semināru atklāt aicinu mūsu Izglītības un zinātnes ministri Ilgu Šuplīnsku. Lūdzu.
Labdien, labdīna, Ieva Pāve. Es biju lūgusi docei Jansonai uzlikt vienu vizuāli. Paldies! Īstenībā man patiešām milzīgs prieks šodien piedalīties vismaz daļēji man laika ietveros šajā seminārā par jaunu akadēmiskās karjeras modeļa izveidi, par to, kāda ir bijusi un kāda ir šī brīža Latvijas situācija, ko Eiropas komisijas un Pasaules bankas pārstāvi piedāvā savā redzējumā, pārskatot un pārzinot jau arī Eiropas tradīcijas. Un tāpēc arī tas, ko šobrīd gribētu teikt, īstenībā ir redzams arī šajā vizualizācijā. Tad augstskolu reforma patiešām ir ļoti zīmīga struktūrālā reforma ne tikai Latvijā, bet es teiktu visā Eiropas augstākās izglītības un pētniecības laukā. Jo veiksmīgs tās risinājums noteikti ļaus arī Eiropai skaidrāk ieraudzīt aprises, kādās specializācijās Latvija ir līdere, kur mēs varam lepoties ar ļoti pārdomātu un efektīvu programmu izvietojumu, kur ir mūsu pievienotās vērtības doktorantu izglītošanā un kādā veidā mēs spējam sadarboties arī ar nozars attīstību. Un tāpēc gribu atgādināt, ka tas, kas šobrīd patiešām tiks piedāvāts diskusijai, ir saistīts ar otro soli, kā mēs sakām, uz modernu augstākās izglītības un pētniecības telpu. Akadēmiskais personāls, tā karjeras izmaiņas, iespējamās pārstrukturizācijas kā slodzē, tā karjeras izpratnē, tā arī neapšaubām atalgojumā. Un tā būtiskākā izmaiņa, kā jūs redzat, šeit ir nofiksēta. Mums gribētos, lai Latvijas augstākās izglītības sistēmā, kas šobrīd ir gan sadrumstalota, bet tomēr lēnām mēs virzāmies arī uz izpratni par sadarbību, konsolidāciju un to, ka integrācija ir ceļš uz jauniem horizontiem, tad tā būtiskākā izmaiņa no pedagoga uz pētnieku. Jo principā mācīšanās process, kas ir balstīts eksperimentā, atklāsmes priekā, saistīts ar paša mācību spēka pētījumiem, tas ir vienīgais ceļš, lai šajā brīdī varētu runāt par inovācijām un problēmu risināšanas ļoti spēcīgu bāzi tepat Latvijā. Otra problēma, kas mums ir izcināma, tā ir akadēmiskā personāla attaudze. Un es ļoti ceru, ka izpratne par to, ka akadēmiskā personāla noslogojumā savienosies pētnieciskais, studiju, administratīvais un arī šīs trešās misijas komponente, nesīs izpratni par to, ka šai attaudzē katrā no organizācijām ir jābūt un ka principā izaugsme, izrāviens, jaunas ambīcijas tiek nospraustas tikai tajā brīdī, kad notiek sinerģija, notiek ļoti, jāsaka, saprotam pāreja un sadarbības ar dažādām paudzēm. Bet ļoti liels akcents tiek likts tieši uz jaunajiem, jo katra jauna paudze nāk ar savu izaicinājumu un nāk ar sava laika izjūtu. Un, diemžēl, ja šī laika izjūta neienāk akadēmiskajā vidē, tad nav iespējams arī pašai organizācijai izvirzīt sev ambiciozākus mērķus. Tāpēc no šīs dienas sarunas es gaidu patiešām precīzi formulēts jautājums, lai mēs varētu sadarbībā ar Eiropas komisijas un Pasaules bankas ekspertiem tos risināt, iesaistot nozari, pārņemot Latvijas labāko praksi un pieredzi un neapšaubām balstoties uz Eiropas pieredzi. Veiksmi visiem!
Jā. Tā. Liels paldies! Kā jau arī ministre teica, jaunā akadēmiskās karjeras ietvara izstrādes projekts tiek īstenot sadarbībā ar Eiropas komisijas struktūrālo reformu atbalsta ģenerāldirektorātu, DG Reform, un to finansē Eiropas Savienība. Un tāpēc vēlamies lūgt ievadvārdus teikt arī DG Reform pārstāvēji Patricijai Perez Gomesai. Patricia? Floor is yours.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much, Brigitta. Thank you very much, Minister. I would like to know if you hear me right, because I was hearing at the same time the English and the Latvian. It was a bit difficult. So I wouldn't like to have people suffering during my words on that. Is that all right? Is that working fine?
Yeah, we just, I got a message from our IT support, and they say that we should mute original language in order to listen better to the translation, to hear better the translation.
All right. Okay. So if everybody has understood what they have to do, I'll go ahead. So first of all, I would like to thank immensely the Latvian Ministry of Education for having invited us to this adventure that started roughly a year ago when they contacted us during our previous call to ask for the technical assistance that the DG Reform is offering to different member states in order to implement their reforms. And I would just like to mention a couple of things of this particular call that really set a bit the ground for this project and will help you understand what is the relevance of this specific project for us and for the Commission, for the European Commission at large. So basically, we are receiving a very high number of requests, around 600 requests every year. And we've managed to support more or less 25–30% of them only. So you can imagine that the level of competition is extremely high. And that also gives you a bit of an idea of the fact that this project for us was a project that we evaluated very positively for a number of reasons. Of course, one of the reasons was that we could identify that there was this strong determination at ministry level, at government level, of really addressing the different problems that you are probably very aware of that regard the higher education career system, but also their agreement on doing it in a very specific way, which is the way that from DG Reform we are really proning systematically, which is to do the reform in a co-creative manner, with a strong participation of all stakeholders, because this is the only way for us that we understand that really there can be some ownership and some really sustainability of any kind of changes that we might support. And this is exactly why we are all here, and we are really eager to have you participating and to have you listening to the proposals, but mostly making the proposals and providing your opinions and your inputs to build up a proposal all together. But I would just like to say a word also on how relevant this project is for the European Commission a bit more at large. I mean, the higher education is really a cornerstone of any kind of growth system, particularly in the days we are living in, where digital transition and green transition rely very, very highly on innovation. And this will only be possible with a strong higher education system that is able to provide the individuals with the right set of skills, with the right set of knowledge, but also with the tools for them to adapt and address the challenges of a very changing world systematically. It has to have the opportunity also and the capacity to respond to the needs of the labor market, to respond to the needs of the companies in the wider economy that are eager to launch innovative systems, innovative initiatives. But for this, it definitely has to be able not only to attract talents in the society, but also to be able to retain them. And the higher education career system is at the very basis of this endeavor, of this challenge. So for us, this was a major project that would also be a good example for many other member states that are in the very pressing need to go about this same type of reform that is based on finding the right balances to, of course, provide fair treatment, motivation, good relationship between science and teaching, but of course in a world that unfortunately is full of constraints, both financially and also institutional constraints. So just to say that we are really extremely happy that the World Bank also accepted the challenge of carrying along this project, that we are extremely thankful to the Ministry of Education of Latvia for giving DJ Reform the opportunity to work in this very relevant topic that we are very hopeful will also serve as a case study for other member states in the future, who are already communicating to us their concern regarding this very specific issue. So just going back to the very beginning of my intervention, just to say that in any case, this is nevertheless quite a privilege that we are able to be here because the competition was very high. So it's definitely your right to contribute, but also your responsibility. So I'm encouraging you to take the best advantage of this opportunity and be extremely participative in this day of work. And I wish you an excellent working day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you. And now, of course, also our World Bank's representatives. As you know, we organized this workshop today with the World Bank, and that's why I'm giving also floor to the leader of the team, Diego Ambas. Please.
Thank you very much, Brigitta, and thank you so much, Madam Minister and Patricia, for the opening remarks. I think you put the objective and the framework of the seminar very well, so I will not expand on this. But yes, please count with the World Bank to support you, Madam Minister, in this reform. And of course, we will try to do our best in the same way that we did in the past years, and I will explain this a bit more during my presentation. On behalf of the World Bank, thank you so much to everybody who is participating in this event. Now I see almost 100 people that are participating in this. This is a great success. Together with me, we have also five experts in this webinar. We have Elias Pekola from Finland. We have Lucia Brajkovic from Zagreb. We have Andres Sursok from Paris. And we have Jeremy Amoroso from Washington, D.C. And of course, we have more people in the team, but we wanted to let you know that it's not only me who is going to be working with you. It's a huge amount of people that are supporting you, trying for you to do the best reform that you can achieve, Madam Minister. I would like to emphasize only 1 minute. I will not repeat what you already mentioned. I would like to emphasize the issue of the stakeholder consultation. I think it is really important. We, as the bank, try to provide the best knowledge and the best practices in the world, but it's really important to hear all of you, all these stakeholders that are coming today, all participants from universities, from different institutions, and it is very important to hear from them their concerns and their interests and their suggestion on how to reform the system. We did this in the past. I remember, based on everything that I read from your successful reform in the area of doctorate and in the area of financing, how the stakeholder consultation process was done in the past. We should continue on this. And for this project, this is a webinar due to the pandemic, but I'm sure that in the next few months, we are going to have the opportunity to visit you in Riga and have successful mission and meet with all of you in order to do a better stakeholder consultation. Thank you very much, and let's open the door for the seminar.
Yes, thank you, Diego. And you are actually the first presenter. The first section of our program focuses on developing new career frameworks in the Baltic region. So, Diego, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will not take too much. Maybe Basia, can you upload the PowerPoint, please? Okay, this is very good. Let's go to the next slide, where we are going to try to explain the scope of the project. And basically what you can see there at the beginning is a kind of a recent history where how the World Bank has been supporting Latvia since 2013, first with the higher education financing model, at the system level. And then from 2016 and 2018, there were support in the area of internal allocation of funds and performance-based financing at institutions, and also on the area of university internal governance. And the recent work that we have been supported was related to human resources policy, academic recruitment, promotion, remuneration, that this is part of what we are going to focus today. And also something that I know that very recently you launched an important reform in the area of doctorates. Next, please. Why would we like to focus on the academic career framework? I think that the Madam Minister explained very well, Patricia also. In our last report, basically we developed two big recommendations that now we are going to disaggregate, but basically the recommendation that we included in our report was that we need to ensure that the individual career trajectories are predictable and compatible with formal career structures, and at the same time that we should maintain the transparency of institutional promotion criteria. These are the two big recommendations. That is very broad, but we are going to disaggregate and to deep in the discussion today. Next, please. Okay, if we try to do a very quick summary regarding the academic careers in Latvia, we can say 5 things. First, that the academic careers are an important aspect of higher education policies and practice, as the Minister and Patricia mentioned. Second, that we believe that Latvia still has a fragmented approach to academic careers, and this in the future will be likely to hamper the development if there is not a change. Number 3, that this fragmentation of the academic careers results in a complicated human resources arrangements and processes at the institutional level and create a kind of fragile arrangement for individuals. We see also that the academic careers in Latvia nowadays are a succession of individual jobs, which makes planning for such a career difficult, and the academic career overall a bit less attractive. And finally, the concept of internationalization. Internationalization is a bit weak and affects several aspects of the academia, and this is what should have to improve. Next, please. So based on this, together with the Ministry of Education, the European Commission and us, we designed this project that the specific objective of the project is to support the Latvian Ministry of Education and Science in reforming its academic career system by proposing a new academic career framework in line with the European and international good practices, including a proposed system of academic positions and related selection and promotion processes. This new framework, of course, will be accompanied by a proposed roadmap for implementation and an analysis of legal and financial implications also developed by this project. And what we expect as an intended outcome? Well, it's clearly, we would like to enhance the attractiveness and the efficiency of the Latvian higher education system in line with the European and international good practice. Next, please. So how are we thinking this in terms of planning? So we divided this like in the scope in 4 phases. One is what we call the Inception Phase, that I would say that we already achieved it. That basically we need to produce an ideas paper that I think you have now in your hands and also has been translated into Latvian. And we also did a kickoff event at the end of June. So this first phase we consider almost done. And we are entering in the second phase that we call the diagnosis, where we are doing this information event today. Congratulations for this. And then we are planning to do different study visits to learn more about international experience. And we are thinking countries like Finland that today Elias will present, maybe could be Ireland, and could be another countries depending on how the dialogue evolves. We understand, for example, that now Netherlands are trying to do a very important reform on the academic career system. So we are going to see the situation of Netherlands. I know that you are interested in Estonia. So we will see how this evolves, but we are open and flexible to think about this kind of study visits that will be good for you. Then we are going to enter to the phase of recommendations, where there what we are going to do is we are going to follow up with this kind of workshop that we are going to do today, but with a more advanced discussion, because we are going to have already the diagnosis and the results from the study visits. And the idea is that with these recommendations, the authorities, you and everybody will have the different options in order to make the decision on what academic career framework you are going to decide. And finally, we are going to finalize with the process of dissemination and follow up, where we are going to produce a report on everything that we have been working, and we are planning to do a dissemination activity. Next, please. So, in order to introduce today's information event, in a few minutes, Elias Pekola, he will present the case of Finland. And then we are going to shift to a different modality for this seminar, where I will be more proactive from your side. And I hope that you help us to have a very fruitful discussion, where we are going to discuss about the principles, because we believe that we cannot think about an academic career framework without thinking about the principles and the strategic goals of higher education. And then we are going to go deep on the two big topics within the academic career framework, that is the progression models and processes, where Andre will do the moderator on this discussion. And we are going to finalize with the staff categories, where in this case, Elias, again, he's going to be moderated. Next, please. Okay, I think that's for me. I think I talked too much. So I think it's now time to go to the substance and the discussion. And again, congratulations to everybody. Now we are 101 people in the stream. So congratulations again, and let's begin. So I will give the floor to Elias in order to begin presenting the case of Finland. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Diego. Regarding questions, I think that maybe after Elias' presentation, we can open the floor for questions, and also give this option technically, yeah, unmute participants and give them an opportunity to ask some questions. I think that time-wise we are all right, but yeah, it's quite tight as well. Yeah, let's keep track of our time as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brigitta and Diego. So, Madam Minister, ladies and gentlemen, it's my greatest pleasure to start this seminar by presenting you good practices from case of Finland. My name is Elias Pekkola. I come from University of Tampere, Faculty of Management and Business, and I'm also working as a head of a unit. So in a way, I'm practically involved in also developing the career model within Tampere University. I have been doing research on Finnish academic careers and career models now for more than 10 years. So I will try to tell you a story about the development of the academic careers. And now I can see that I have 2 minutes for a year. So I will be telling you a story of 12 years of development of the career framework in Finland. So I have 2 minutes per year, so let's start. So next, please. It was year 2008 when government gave a kind of policy paper recommendation of development of a new career framework in the Finnish higher education system. It was a framework aimed for universities and research institutions. So it was an integrated framework. It was based on a European idea of 4-stage career framework. And the idea was to actually, or the aims were quite the same than now in Latvia. So the idea was to develop more international, more excellency-based, more transparent, and more predictable career framework. So this was the starting point. 2008, a policy paper, a recommendation on the Finnish career model. So this was the starting point for the story. Next, please. From the beginning, Finnish government decided to integrate also research funding into this overall framework. So Academy of Finland, that is the main funding institution in Finnish higher education system, also adapted the 4-stage career model. So I just want to remind you and also kind of give you kind of one of kind of practices that should be emphasized is that the funding instruments should be always taken into account when developing a new career framework, the national ones and then also the international ones. And we started from our previous report kind of from the recommendation that the career framework should be something that takes into account also the funding mechanism. So this is kind of an important lesson to learn, that the funding instruments should be taken into account from the beginning. Next, please. And then also I would like to emphasize, because I was also told to, I was also recommended to kind of share you some, so to say, not to do's or some recommendations what should not be done. So I would like to kind of share with you kind of a reality of a Finnish landscape in 2008, 9, and 10. So even though the government was recommending a new career framework, so in practice, it was applied only for 50% of the academic staff within the institutions. And the reality, like it is in Latvia as well, was that more than half of the employees were actually in a really short-term contracts, and they were not part of the official career framework. So this is also something that should be taken into account from the really beginning of the development, the career framework, how it is applied, in which institutions and for whom it is actually applied. So not to create any fallacies, so to say, not to create any career frameworks or impressions of a development in a career that then doesn't actually fit into the reality. So in real life, in 2008-9, it was only applied for, let's say, half of the academic staff. So this is something that is also really important to take into account, that it should be kind of considered and developed and planned for the whole system. Next, please. It was only 2010 when there was actually changes in the legislation. So the Finnish government started with a policy paper and recommendation. Of course, the reform of the legislation was already ongoing in 2008, but it was actually enforced only in 2010. And in Finnish case, there were huge changes also in the legislation. The universities became independent employers, so they were detached from the government. So this was quite important for the Finnish case. So in Finland, actually, the universities, even though they are still publicly funded, and most of them are public, so they were detached from the state budget, so they became an independent employers. And also the status of employee was changed from the civil servants to employee. That was also a major change in the Finnish system. And the universities were provided a lot of autonomy and power to actually define the qualifications. So this was also a major change from the previous situation. And this is something also that should be taken into account. So what is the role of the institutions? How much of autonomy can be provided for the institutions? And actually, are the institutions ready to use the autonomy? In a Finnish case, if we once again say something about the kind of realities of the reform, the institutions were not ready to actually use the autonomy that was given for the institution. And it took many years actually to get into a situation where we are now. Then, of course, also the ministry was kind of resistant to give the power for the institution, even though officially it was done. So ministry still continued to steer the institutions by this foster career framework, by asking statistics related to this or reporting related to this framework. And there was also some other instruments providing inertia for the system. So universities, they still had a common salary system. Actually, they still do. So actually, all of the universities are following the same salary system, even though they are not part of the state anymore. And then the legislation related to the professors, so the highest rank, the most senior rank in universities, was remained almost intact. So in a way, the professors were still in the legislation. So that wasn't given for the institutions to decide what is the qualification of the professors. And this has created actually a lot of challenges, but also it has kind of created one of the kind of continuing point for the reform. Next, please. And what then actually happened in the universities? So in real life, there were two different processes taking place. So we will discuss today quite a lot about tenure tracks and tenure track positions and the promotions from, let's say, assistant to associate and then to full professor. But this was only part of the story in Finland. Meanwhile, when Finland was introducing a four-stage career framework, only as part of it, they were introducing tenure track positions. And that was kind of a minor part in the beginning. In the 2008 policy paper, so there is the first idea of the tenure track model, but that wasn't the whole idea. The whole idea was actually to integrate different kind of career models within different institutions in different sectors, in universities and in research institutions. So that was the main idea, to create 4 steps in a career path that can be then compared from institution to another. And then as a one instrument, there was also tenure track introduced for promotion of the professors. And this is something that needs to also consider whether the tenure track, whatever it means, and let's discuss that more today. So whether it will be kind of a starting point for a new career framework or whether it will be only a minor instrument within the career framework. And in Finland, there was a huge confusion with this. So many persons, they thought that, okay, the tenure track is applied to all of those persons within the career, 4-stage career model or framework or path. But actually, it was only a kind of minor instrument within the overall framework. So this is something that should be really considered. And then there were also changes of actual career titles, and we will discuss that in the afternoon, what kind of career categories there will be in the Latvian case. But in the Finnish case, kind of the most tricky things that were done when changing the career framework were actually the change of an also say assistant positions to PhD student positions, because then quite soon we realized that actually there are a lot of administrative work that is done by academics, and that doesn't disappear even though we will start calling assistant PhD students. So in a way, there was a huge confusion who will take role in actually carrying out those tasks. Then there was also an introduction, or the government also introduces the position of postdoc. And that was also something that within the institutions, there were not structures for postdoc positions, and there were no funding for those positions. And that was also a huge confusion whether there should be kind of a career step of a postdoctoral researcher, or whether it's just kind of an additional position that can be applied. And there is still a huge discussion going on in the Finnish institutions whether these postdoctoral positions should be part of the career framework, part of the tenure track frameworks, or not. And then there was the question of tenure track as such, as I discussed already. So it was part of the promotion idea, part of the recruitment of professors, but it was confused with the overall career framework. And the career framework is a national way of reporting and making statistics out of personnel. But then the tenure track system, the instrument as such, is defined quite differently in different institutions. And that has created a lot of challenges in a Finnish higher education landscape. Next one, please. Now, time has passed, and there's already 12 years of experience from this career framework. And it has been evaluated several times. First time it was evaluated in 2013 by Academy of Finland. And they were actually looking mostly it from the perspective of university professors. And they realized that actually this tenure track promotion system is not widely used or utilized. And it's only used in the rare kind of strategic cases. And the volume of tenure track recruitment is quite low. And they recommended in 2013 that to be really an effective reform, so this tenure track recruitment should be taken more seriously and it should be applied more widely. And there was an overall recommendation by the Academy of Finland for the universities and also research institutions that the job descriptions of the professors should be wide as possible. There should be international calls for the positions, and the tenure track should be used as one instrument to actually to do both of these, to have more international calls and to have more wide job descriptions, to have more applicants for the positions, because Finnish career system was and partly still is quite closed, and the professorships are usually, when there is an application for an open position, they are usually from 4 to 6 applicants. And there was kind of a recommendation that you should have more applicants and they should be international. So in a way, I think we had a little bit same kind of a situation that you currently have in Latvia from that perspective. Next, please. Then there was kind of a evaluation of the overall career framework, not only the professors and the recruitment of professors, but the whole career framework in 2016. And I was part of the group making this evaluation. And then 2016, we kind of realized that, okay, the framework has been applied in all of the universities, but actually there is still a lot of confusion between the traditional recruitment within the traditional positions, let's say lecturer's position, professorships, and senior lecturer's positions, and then to the recruitment of the tenure track professors. So professors that can be then promoted. So there was still 2 parallel systems in the Finnish landscape. There was one based on vacancies, open positions, and then the other one based on tenure track and the promotions. And these were confused by the institution, and then it was also confusing for the applicants. So we recommended that there should be a clear distinction with tenure processes and the normal processes, because they were, in 2016, they were confused in many places. And we also recommended that there should be a national framework for tenure tracks. And this goes back to the legislation that actually doesn't, and it still doesn't recognize tenure tracks as such. So we do not have any legislation on tenure tracks. And actually there's still ongoing debate how we should kind of interpret these probationary periods into tenure tracks when it comes to the labor legislation and also university legislation. So in 2016, 8 years after the publishing of the policy paper, the universities were still mostly applying the traditional recruitment system. They were mostly using traditional processes, but then on top of that, they were using tenure track positions, and there was huge confusion. But what happened, and we can say that that was kind of a success, within 8 years, the universities were capable transferring the titles. I think there was something like 250 titles within the Finnish universities to less than 10 titles. So in that sense, it was a success story within 8 years. But when it comes to the practices and processes, we were still in an infancy in a new career system in 2016. Next, please. The most recent development is actually quite surprising for myself. I have been now following it really closely, and we did a small study on it as well. And now in 2020, we can see that the Finnish system has changed. So it took 12 years. Now actually most of the professors are recruited to tenure track positions. And now just to remind you, that wasn't the original idea. The original idea was to integrate career models within different types of institutions and to provide an overall framework. And in the end, it led us to a situation in which the professors, almost all of them, are actually recruited through tenure track positions. So now the change has happened. The applicant pool, as it was recommended by Academy of Finland in 2013, has changed a lot. There are more applicants. They are actually more international, but with internationality, there was kind of a side effect. They are now more male than they used to be. So that's also something that should be taken into account. So once you are making your processes more international, so it might come with kind of different side impacts. But actually then when we see the selected persons, so the change is not so big. But when we are looking for the applicants, so we can see that there are now more males than if we would be just recruiting Finns. So this was something that was a little bit surprising. And then the development is still organic in the Finnish universities. So there are no legislation or national practices for the tenure track. So it is still kind of institutional, under institutional autonomy, how to frame the tenure track and promotion system. And the legislation doesn't really recognize the tenure track professors or assistant or associate professors. It is only actually recognizing full professors. And now in the Finnish landscape, there is a question of professorate, how we should define it, who are professors, and what is the kind of first step when you can call a person a professor. And the law is quite clear with that. It's only a full professor that has been evaluated by 2 external experts. But then institutional practices do vary quite a lot. And we do have an invitation procedure in the Finnish legislation as well, that you can invite professors. And that was kind of considered to be exception. In a way, when you have someone who is really distinguished, then you can invite someone. But actually all tenure track professors in the end, when they are promoted, they are invited. So there are a lot of confusions within the national system. So as kind of a lessons learned, you should consider the role and the processes to actually select and promote full professors. Next, please. Now, a few years later, let's say 2 years ago, also the Finnish Union for Professors actually made their own recommendation of the good tenure track practices. And how I read this as a researcher and as a kind of closely practitioner following the system is that when reading those recommendations, how to develop a good practice in tenure tracks. So you can also read kind of the critical points, and also you can probably see some not to do's from this list. So usually these recommendations are based on practical problems. And actually it is quite evident that also this list that is actually quite good is providing you some insights about the things that should have been considered more carefully in the beginning I think nowadays they are quite okay, but in the beginning there was a lot of issues related to tenure track practices. And the most important thing when you are defining tenure track position is to have criteria. Criteria that is transparent and is published and is public. So if you don't have that in place for those who are recruited to their positions and then they are promoted, in the end they will become full professors. So then you run into the problems. So before establishing a tenure track system, you should really carefully consider the criteria. And many of the points in this list are actually emphasizing the fact that you should have really well-defined criteria, and then you should define all of the outcomes carefully and practically. So if it's a scientific quality or excellence, so it has to be defined in a way that person can understand what should I do to actually show that I have this qualification. And then one more thing that is something that should be taken into account is to actually make already a plan for those who who are not promoted. And this was something that wasn't really planned carefully in many institutions in Finland. There would be always persons who are not promoted. So what happens to those persons? That's really an important question. And from institutional perspective, that's the failure. Always when you recruit someone, so you hope that he or she will success. But if he or she doesn't, so what to do after that? So this was also something that should be considered. Next, please. There are some institutional examples that will be discussed more today, but just to show you that there are great variety in the Finnish institutions to actually define the tenure track system. There are differences in the steps, there are differences in the time span, and there are differences in understanding the word tenure. So for instance, in Aalto, it's quite a traditional US type of model in which you can see that the word tenure in the box called tenure decision. So it's a decision to make someone permanent. But in some other universities, it doesn't actually mean that. It means only that you are on a track. So even the word, even within one system, may have different meanings. And a question for you is actually what you will mean when you are discussing about tenure track and tenure track positions. And I think Andre will start discussing this with you a little bit later on today. Next, please. Okay, there is another one. This is an example from University of Eastern Finland that is actually quite advanced also, but it says explicitly that it's only for few. So there are also differences. In other universities, it's for all who want to become a professors, and in Eastern Finland, it was considered to be only for few, only the best ones. And otherwise, there was an idea that there will be traditional recruitments. Now, the picture is changing, and also University of Eastern Finland is going towards the same idea and other universities. But it may mean different things in different institutions. Next, please. Okay, and this is a system from my own institution, University of Tampere. I'm not going into details, but here I would like to emphasize you one thing. And of course, you don't understand Finnish, but there are weird translations in the Finnish language for the titles. So for instance, associate professor is called tenure track professori. So it is a translation, it's a job title that doesn't actually exist. So this is also something that you should really emphasize, the national language translation of these titles to avoid confusions. Only the translation issue has been a huge problem in Finland. And now I know I have 1 more minute to go. Next, please. Okay, to sum it up, so new career structure in Finland and typically, so what it does not do, and this is something that it was surprising in Finland, even though it was quite evident. It doesn't increase the funding in the system. It doesn't change the tasks that someone has to do and address. It doesn't increase the leading positions in the system, or it can, but it often doesn't because there is a certain amount of persons who can be full professors, and it doesn't provide promotion to all. And these were not well enough highlighted in the Finnish case. because there was confusion in all of these. For instance, most of the academics, they thought, okay, now there's a new 4-stage career model, so I can be promoted in my own position. But that wasn't the case, and it still is not the case. But it provides you a framework, but it doesn't provide a promotion ladder for all. It wasn't developed like that. However, the new career framework can help to fit to the international funding schemes. So in that sense, it can provide an easy access to international funding as well. It can make the task and responsibilities more transparent. So it can, in that way, kind of provide new understanding of the roles and responsibilities and division of labor. It can provide transparent and fair promotion horizon, so predictability. So it can actually provide an idea what one should do to get promoted and what kind of work will be rewarded. So in a best case scenario, it will provide predictability for those who want to actually work hard and want to be promoted. Next, please, and I will close after this. So I would like to highlight, already Diaco highlighted the characteristics of Latvian academic careers based on our previous study, so I'm not going there, but I would like to highlight that tenure as concept might mean quite different things in different countries. In some countries, it means a permanent position. In some countries it might mean a promotion track. And in some countries, it can be developed on basis of permanent positions, like in Estonia. In some countries, this can be only for few and selected persons. And in some countries, it can be the only way towards the professorship. So there are huge differences in defining the tenure and tenure track, and also huge differences in cultural understanding of the word tenure track, and whether it is a synonym for a career framework and promotion ladder, or whether it's type of a position. So this is something that we should discuss, and we should clarify for ourselves what we actually mean by career framework, nationally, career model, institutionally, and tenure individually. And this is all that I had to say. So I think I can close it here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elias. We really appreciate, I hope that everybody appreciates your presentation. There is 2 questions that are coming from the audience that I think it will be good if you can respond. The first one is, could you describe a bit more how academic career path reforms in Finland were funded and what resources it required in parallel with the existing funding for higher education in Finland? This is the first question.
Yeah, excellent.
And the second question, okay. And the second question is, for the past 20 years, Finland has been introducing consolidation of the higher education institution network. How did that affect the academic careers? These are the 2 questions that we received.
Excellent questions, both of them. So first question is easy to answer. So there hasn't been kind of separate funding for career framework development within the Finnish system. The only exception is Aalto University that was heavily funded when it was established. And also as part of that establishment, they were kind of able to develop the career framework. And they were actually having their own salary system, and they were kind of investing quite a lot of money to actually go through the reforming of the entire career framework within their own institution. But otherwise, it has happened as part of the normal activities of higher education institutions. No special funding for that, no additional money into the system. And that has created also kind of tensions there, because not everyone can be professors. You cannot have tenure tracks, new tenure tracks without additional funding. There was Academy of Finland structural or kind of profiling funding, providing few strategic positions for tenure track personnel, for instance. And now that funding has ended, And now, for instance, in my own institution, we are in a phase of trying to find places for those persons that were selected based on their research excellence. So where to place those persons who might be, let's say, from my own unit, I give you an example. There is an excellent research oriented person in public law. And she's one of the best scholars that we have. But how she can actually teach public law for the Finnish students in Finnish? So these are now the questions that we are facing. And I think you will face the same issues if you start developing the tenure track positions based on external funding as a strategic way of defining the profiling areas. So you have to think 5 or 10 years ahead how those persons will be integrated to their overall career system of the institution. Really an important question, maybe one of the most important questions. And then there was a question of mergers, I think, within the Finnish higher education system. That's also a question that comes quite close to my own institution, because we have just created a big university based on 2 different universities within Tampere area. And in some cases, the new career framework and the tenure track position has made it a little bit easier, because then you have a new practices that you then can implement in 2 different institutions. But in practice, you have also 2 different cultures that you have to change to have one new culture in a way. So it has positive impacts, and also it has created great challenges. And especially for those who are on the tenure track, and then there has been these mergers, and they should then be promoted to the next step, and they have a tenure track agreement based on one institution practice, and the other one has for the another institution practice, and now they are in the same department. What to do with these agreements? That is a major question that we are actually, for instance, this morning I was dealing with one of that kind of a question, how to go about with the systems that are overlapping and have different kind of a time perspective within one institution that was earlier in 2 different universities. I don't know whether I answered at least partly your questions.
Thank you very much, Elias. This is very useful. So now I think it's time for having a very, very short break. I would suggest no more than 7-10 minutes maximum. So now it's 11:08. Let's be again all together 11:18, so we can begin with the sessions discussions. We have 3 session discussions to go, and the first one will be regarding to the principles. So let's take a break, but please come back in less than 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It is not necessary that you leave the meeting, so you can still leave it on. I'll leave it on, but you can take your coffee or just have some, a rest, a little bit of rest. Thank you. Tā tad visi ar savām kafijas tasītēm, tējas tasītēm atpakaļ. Skatījos arī komentārus un šo to atbildēju čatā. Ja? Tātad tagad mēs turpinam ar tādu dinamiskāku un arī interaktīvāku semināra sadaļu. Tātad tās būs diskusijas ar jums, dalībniekiem, par pamatjēdzieniem, par mūsu kopējā darba izpratni un par tādiem atvērtiem jautājumiem saistībā ar jaunā karjeras ietvera izstrādi. Un tātad šeit plānotas 3 sesijas, katra no tām ir 40 minūšu gara, un katra šīs te sekcijas vai diskusijas ietveros tātad sākumā prezentācija, un tad Pasaules Bankas eksperta vadīta diskusija, jautājumi un arī jūsu atbildes redzējums un jūsu jautājumi, mūsu atbildes. Ja? Tātad ļoti tāda cerams dinamiska diskusija. Jā, un tad sākam. Diego iepazīstinās ar pirmo runātāju, kas uzsāks diskusiju par principiem.
Thank you very much, Brigitta. As Brigitta said, we are going now to begin this kind of interactive sessions. The topics that we are going to deal with it are based on what we prepare in the Academic Career Framework for Latvia Ideas paper. So you have this paper. And basically the first discussion will be around what we call principles. The main statement is the main strategic goals for higher education and science should be taken into account when we are planning a career framework, but reversely the same. Human resources policies, political context, administrative issues, as well as legal framework should also be considered when defining the new higher education and science policies. So in this sense, let's begin with this discussion about principles. I know that you have a kind of questions that we prepare in advance, but let me introduce Jeremy Amoroso, who will be the moderator for this session and will present some slides also for you. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Diego. Can everyone hear me, or can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? Okay, great. Thank you. And can we get the presentation on the screen, please? Thank you. And it should be, yes, slide. Next slide, please, 25. Great, thank you very much. So thank you again, Diego, Elias, and Brigitta for setting the foundation for not only this first discussion, but also for the other discussions that will follow from Andre and once again from Elias. It'll be helpful to begin this discussion with a refresher on the policy priorities that have been identified and narrowed down by the ministry, specifically those that apply to higher education and science for the upcoming period for 2021 to 2027. These priorities are outlined in the draft document titled Guidelines for Science, Technology Development and Innovation. And you see these 6 priorities here. I won't go through all of them, but they are excellence in science, digital transformation and open science, and the 6th one there that you see is innovation to stimulate development and promote implementation. These priorities that have been narrowed down are sourced from several recommendations provided from not only various national policy documents for Latvia, but also from international and national tasks on higher education in Latvia. Next slide, please. Another set of guidelines, specifically the guidelines for education development, outlines the 4 key objectives and aims for the same period. And you can see these on the slide, and they pertain to various aspects of the education system. The 4 objectives are first to develop highly qualified, competent, and excellence-oriented pedagogues and academic staff. Secondly, to develop modern, high quality and highly valued skills for the labor market. The 3rd objective is to support everyone's growth. And the 4th is it will last but by no means least, the 4th objective is, as outlined in the guidelines, is for sustainable and efficient management of the higher education system and its resources. And now we would focus specifically on higher education with the next slide, please. These are the planned changes in higher education categorized, and these have been identified as being most essential. These changes broadly relate to academic staff, quality assurance, and governance. And it is under this first category of planned changes that we would focus on here today, specifically the first bullet point with developing and implementing a new career framework in Latvia, with the intent of ensuring a more sustainable academic career. With the next slide, please. Based on the World Bank's previous support in Latvia, there are principles upon which the development of a comprehensive career framework for Latvia can be based. And here you see the 3 broad principles. There are principles that aim to achieve academic excellence. And this category of principles would include familiar topics such as academic integrity, relevance, and cross-disciplinarity. Within these principles, the career framework would focus on academic freedom, objectivity, and independence of science, to name a few aspects that relate to academic integrity. Regarding relevance, the career framework would focus on enabling competitiveness and efficiency of academic work, to name a few. And under cross-disciplinarity within the category of academic excellence, the career framework would aim to take into account disciplinary differences and also enable cross-disciplinarity. Within the second category of these principles, we have professional development. And there are many aspects that will, of course, be familiar to you in terms of professional advancement, internationalization, diversity, and international comparability, which the career framework would help to achieve. And lastly, as a refresher, the 3rd set of principles would focus on HR practices. And some of these practices are, again, familiar in terms of having transparency, fairness, rewards and steering, strategic management, and also having and establishing practices that can be administered. And on this last point, it's important to circle back or link this to what this refresher introduced, and that is the national plans and various supporting documents that underpin some of the background research that we've done to date. The career framework would align with legislation, policies, funding, and resources, as well as a reporting system based on the necessary principles for developing such a framework. With this refresher in mind, and this anchor in mind, I'd like to take this opportunity to begin with the discussions. We welcome your feedback and comments and all of your responses throughout the event, and specifically for this first discussion on principles for developing a career framework in Latvia. The first question that I'll pose to the audience and the participants on the webinar it pertains to the labor market and skills, and specifically, how should the new career framework be integrated into Latvia's labor market for a highly skilled labor force? And related to that, going a bit broader or zooming out, how would it be integrated into the European and international labor market? I'll pause here and rather than jump directly into two responses, I'll give the audience about 2 minutes to reflect on these two questions, and then I will come back and engage the responses. After the responses for this first set of questions, I'll then move on to another set of questions. Thank you.
This is Elias. Can I jump in just really shortly?
Of course.
Yeah, just kind of give you one example again from Finnish case. So in 2016, when we were evaluating the Finnish career framework, so actually we realized that even though the national main aim of the new career framework was to integrate different sectors, to create functioning labor market for skilled labor force in a Finnish case. So when we asked from the universities, what you consider that is the most important aim of your career models? So no one actually highlighted this part. They didn't even recognize this policy A. So it's, as Jeremy said, it's really important to actually start thinking why we should develop new career framework national level, and then how we can implement it in that way that the academic excellence, professional development, and HR practices can be achieved. So these are really important questions. And for instance, in the Finnish case, the higher education institutions were not even aware that the national aim was to kind of create a labor market for skilled labor force from universities to research institutions. So just to give you kind of one example from the Finnish perspective. Thanks, Jeremy.
No, thank you for adding that context.
Very good, Jeremy. Very good, Elias. So let's open the floor now to our colleagues in Latvia. And as I said at my opening remarks, please feel free to discuss. We really would like to hear from you. This is very important for what is going to come next in terms of the preparation of the report. So we really would like to hear your views on this. Thank you.
And so the first questions, again, how should the new career framework be integrated into Latvia? You can look at it as sort of sub-questions: Latvia's labor market and the European and international labor market for a highly skilled labor force.
Could I ask a question? Andris Teikmanis from Art Academy of Latvia. I would like to ask, in the context, thank you, Jeremy, for mentioning this very important aspect about interaction between academic career and labor market, and particularly in the field of art and design, where is really high skilled labor market. It's a very tough question how to ensure that there will be always the relations between academic skills and these skills in the field like art and design. And what's your opinion how these mechanisms could be developed in order to ensure that academic staff always would be the top staff in the fields of art and design, and how to provide, how to say, shortcuts for recruitments for really top level professionals in the academic positions, top level academic positions. Do you have any opinion from other fields how to ensure such career paths?
Thank you very much for this question. I open the floor, Elias, Jeremy, whoever wants to respond this, and also I open the floor for Andre if she also wants to jump in on the question that is going to come. So maybe Elias, you could begin.
Yeah, an excellent question again. So this question of arts has been also in Finland quite tricky one, and actually there has been a development of differentiated career path for the arts. But to answer your little bit more widely in a way. So how to secure those fast tracks? It's really important to think about different kind of entrance points into the academic careers in different stages of academic career. So for instance, the more senior part of the academic careers, let's say associate professors, so you may have different kind of professors of practice or industry professors, or why not artistic professors, so that you ensure that there are places in which also really highly skilled professionals can enter without having 25 years of doing academic publishing and research. So you really have to consider the entrance and also the exit points from an academic career. So in a way, you are highly right that we often think that there is one entrance point in the beginning and then starts the promotion path. But in many cases, especially in the small countries like Latvia and Finland, we have a limited number of professionals. And if you want to have a highly skilled professional, for instance, in a teaching duty in higher education, so you cannot expect them to go through the whole path. So you have to create entrance points for those professionals. Let's say, yeah, professor of practice, industry professors, or other type of visiting scholars. Also international, but mainly probably national ones. Really an important question. We need to highlight entrance and exit points in different career steps, not only one entrance point and then one exit point through retirement, because we want to see, I guess, mobility between different sectors. Excellent question, really an important point.
Thank you, and really thank you for your clarification. And thank you for our presentations, of course, Elia and Jeremy. Yeah, I think it's a really timely discussion in our higher education field. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think Andre want to jump in also.
Yeah, first of all, hello, Andres. It's nice to hear your voice.
Hello, nice to meet you again.
Yes,
thank
yes.
you.
What I wanted to add, I mean, the key message from Elias is flexibility, and it's flexibility of the model, but it's also, I think, flexibility when one is managing individual careers. That people develop over time, and will if we stop talking about the arts and design, which is a specific sector, but in general, the balance between research and teaching, the balance between practical activities and more theoretical research activities, all that need to be able to change and evolve over the lifetime of an individual. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind, so that the framework or the models that are developed do not lock in people in specific roles, but allow them to develop over time.
Thank you, Andrea. I think it's absolutely timely point being made because this framework should be really flexible in order to serve all aspects, all kind of education and art education among them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone would like to raise another question, or it could be not a question, it could be just a reflection or a comment from what it has been said?
I see that in our chat box, we have a comment from Agrita Kiopa, who is Vice Rector at Riga Stradiņš University. And she writes that backbone of the academic excellence is excellence and integrity research. Therefore, tenure track, if any, should be parallel to research track or progression of one's research program from its emergence to independence, to formation of a group, to leadership. And I think that this also highlights what Andres said. Yeah.
I think it is also raising a question about the nature of tenure track. So whether we think that in all types of positions you should have ways to be promoted and to be tenured in the end, or whether tenure track is developed mainly for research-based duties, and they are kind of really research-based positions. And this is an open question. There is no right or wrong answers for this. But going back to Andre's comment, so I think that there is two different levels of the discussion again. So there is the individual level and the flexibility within the individual model, individual promotion scheme, and then the balancing between this individual flexibility and then the transparent criteria that are more universal. And this balancing activity has to take place all the time, and it's quite tricky, to be honest. So that's really a good comment in that sense. That on the other hand, you have already defined criteria, usually in research excellence. On the other hand, you might have flexible individual planning of your promotion patterns, including other types of merits as well. And then you may have multiple entrance points to different steps of the career. So in a way, it's a balancing activity.
Thank you, Elias. And we have another question for you in Latvian from Gita Revalde. And she asks, how do you assess Finnish reform? Did it achieve the aims that were set?
So if you take as the aim of the reform, if we take those ideas that were in the first policy paper, so I think otherwise we are quite closely there. So there are increased transparency, there are more predictability, even though there are still a lot of confusions. There are less titles than there used to be. It's a little bit more universal. But when it comes to these tenure track procedures, I think there's still many things to be developed, but that wasn't the main point, but especially when it comes to the integration of different sectors. So, and creating a common framework for research institutions and universities. So especially when you look at it from the higher education perspective, so this is still something that is not really recognized. And of course, I have been doing mainly research in higher education setting here in Finland. So I can say that it's still something that the universities are not maybe considering so much. They are thinking about research excellence. They are thinking about predictability, about rewardingness of the work, about, so funding, of course, if you are able to kind of attract really good international scholars, internationality, fairness. But when thinking about the integration of different sectors, so I think that doesn't really get high in the agenda of higher education institutions, even though it was one of the kind of original aims.
Thank you very much. Any other comment from our counterpart in Latvia?
Yeah, I see another question from Juris Sīlis, but I'm not sure if I understand it correctly. We'll try to translate, and then Juris can let me know if I did it well. So, how can the ability of the academic staff to move from a teaching approach to a research and involvement approach to the study process be, so how can this ability can be best assessed, for the academic staff to move from teaching approach to the research approach in the study process? How can it be assessed?
So I'm not sure what I understood
me too.
correctly, but I assume that you are thinking that how, with the help of new career framework or a model within an institution, we could support the transfer from more teaching-oriented towards more research-oriented competencies of the staff. And this is really a good question. And actually, I can just give you some, practical reflections. So we do have this position of university lecturer in Finnish universities. That is the mainly teaching-oriented position, but it includes also a lot of, some research activities. And now when we transfer to this new 4-step career framework in some universities, when those assistants were transferred to PhD students, so actually those persons in their mid-career, they were receiving new administrative tasks from below, from the assistants. So the lecturers were taking those tasks. And then also there were new tenure track positions, kind of in the same level than the university lecturers, postdoctoral persons who started or were recruited as a tenure track persons with a promotion idea. So also they started to do their own research, and they were really concentrating on their own research. So basically they were not really interested in teaching because they wanted to be full professors. Also from above, there were more administrative duties given for those who were in the teaching mostly position. So this is also something that you really have to carefully think, that is it fair to ask all persons to let's say publish more, if at the same time they are getting more and more teaching and administration related duties. And it takes 10, 15 years to actually change the culture within an institution to have it more research oriented. So it takes a lot of time. So in a way, once again, an excellent question that is really difficult to answer. And then we come into those questions, whether we should have also teaching oriented tenure track. And this is exactly a debate that is going on now in the Finnish landscape in University of Helsinki and University of Eastern Finland. In University of Eastern Finland, they have actually established now a teaching-based tenure track promotion scheme. In Helsinki, they decided not to go into that direction, but it's still heated debate. So excellent question. And this is something that actually you should plan beforehand, because otherwise you will end up with the same question when you already have the framework in place. Excellent question, quite difficult to answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. Did you want to add something, Diego?
I would like to add something, Jeremy.
Yes, please, Andre.
One of the interesting things, I mean, Elias mentioned in passing when talking about research and evaluating researchers about publishing more. He mentioned in passing publishing more. And I just wanted to point out that while bibliometrics have been the main mechanism for evaluating researchers, I think there is quite a bit of discussion now about talking about the quality and the impact of research rather than the number of research publications. It's easy to count, no, and it's easy to count publications, and everybody has been doing it. But I think we are really at the cusp of major changes now, with a research assessment being, the UK has already done it, you know, looking at research assessment more in terms of impact and more in terms of quality than in terms of quantity. The Netherlands is also moving away from this bibliometric stuff. I think in Finland, the conversation is about that. It would be interesting to hear Elias on this. I understand the Norwegian are also working on new policies about assessing research that would move away from just very simplistic, I would say, simplistic bibliometrics.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andre. We have another question from Gunther Skittenbergs.
Yes, hello. I'm Gunther. I'm from the Association of Latvian Young Scientists. And maybe not a question, but a comment on the question that you asked about the integration in Latvian and European job market. from our point of view, I think the most challenging part, but also the most opportunity-based approach is integrating this research and teaching things together. And we have a lot of good research in Latvia, and it's super essential that we make a framework in a way that we take advantage of the highly skilled researchers that are there in the Latvia, and towards European job market. It's also important that we make positions in a way that they can attract the talent from Europe towards our education system. So I think those are the two things that we indicated important from our association point of view. That's it. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
May I ask?
Thank you very much.
One question
is there any question?
Yes, we have one more from Pasaules.
Before we get to the next question, first of all, hello, Gunther. It's nice also to hear your voice. And what this raises about the attractiveness of Latvia is the language issue also. So I don't know if it is something that people care to discuss in this first seminar, but it certainly will be an important element to discuss at some point if you want your labor market to be compatible with an international market. How do you deal with the language issue?
Completely agree. Yes.
If I can also shortly add that it's really important to attract international talents to Latvian system, but also to support Latvians to go outside and then come back. So this coming back part is also quite important. And we have realized in Finland and also in some other countries that actually we should be maybe concentrating quite a lot also on that aspect. And it's often forgotten. So we attract persons and then we support persons to do a mobility period, but then we forget that they should have ways to coming back, ways or funding instruments or positions, how to return back to Latvia or Finland or some other country. So it's a two-way process.
Yeah. So I think that, we had another question Talis wanted to ask. And then, we should close this discussion because of the time frame.
Okay. Talis Juchna from Riga Technical University. I have one question to Elias regarding, let's say, how do you have some kind of data about Sweden or about Finland or about your university? What is the balance between the academic staff employed on long-term project, long-term contracts, you call it tenure track, and short-term contracts, mostly living on projects? Because as it was presented earlier, one of the challenge in Latvia is that majority, at least I'm talking about our university, of academic staff is living on short-term project funding. And by this, I mean we're talking about decent salary. Of course, they have a contract, but the salary, what they are able to receive from budget is relatively non-compatible. So the question is, do you have your opinion about this kind of, what is the healthy relationship? On one hand, to have this kind of long-term commitment from professors, allowing them to be more engaged in education, to provide more of the time for teaching, and then also providing, let's say, some competition among the scientists, so they have this short-term contracts and they live on the projects, but so there should be some kind of ratio. And what is your opinion on what this ratio should be?
Excellent question. So I'll give you an example. So in my unit, there are 97 academics working in my unit. Out of those, 45 are on permanent contract and 50 52 are on fixed project-related contracts. And I think this is an overall picture in Finland, depending a little bit from a discipline to a discipline, but approximately it's half and half. Out of this population of 115 are professors. And it used to be like that out of those 15, maybe 1 or 2 places would be tenure track positions. But now in the new landscape, let's say, starting from 2019, in almost all of the institutions, all of the professors are recruited, almost all are recruited through tenure track recruitment. So actually, when it comes to professor rate, so it's getting younger, and you will start seeing assistant and associate professors also within this 50. So, and what would be a right balance? I would say it would be something, the permanent position should be more than 50%, because we have multiple contracts that has been continuing from year to year. The same persons are in fixed term contracts for year to year, but because of external funding, we are not able to actually employ them, and we are always in the gray area when it comes to legislation. So the ratio, it should be something, let's say 30-70 or something like that, but it's just, a guess. And our problem also is that when it comes to your mid-career positions, so most of them are, let's say, university lecturers positions, and they are permanent, and there are no promotion schemes. So basically, once you are there, you are there. And it's really challenging to actually make the motivational structures for those persons who are not able to get the tenure position and they cannot be promoted. So in a way, there used to be fixed-term positions for senior assistants, let's say from 4 to 5 years, but now those are permanent positions. How to motivate these persons who are not able to be promoted, but they have a permanent position? So this is a real question for us. So I'm asking almost the same questions you were asking. So I don't have any, exact answers.
Well, for us, it's we have the system which we just introducing that every six years the professors are being evaluated. So and that would allow you to have this kind of in between, let's say, having security on one hand, on the other hand, also having a little bit of stress. So every 6 years you will be reevaluated. I think this similar system they have in Estonia as well.
Yeah.
But thank you for the answer. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for this exchange. I think it was very useful. In terms of honor our program, and in order that we could do the following 2 sessions, I would say that let's stop the session of principle now. Please feel free to include any comment by writing if you wanted to say something, but there was no time. And my suggestion now is let's do a break of no more than 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes, so we can meet again at 12:06. And we are going to continue with the session 2 on progression models and process that will be moderated by Andre. And then the last session on staff categories moderated by Elias. So let's meet in 8-9 minutes. See you at 12:07. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so welcome back. Let me, before giving the floor to Andre to moderate the session on progression models and processes, let me assure something. We are really, really glad to see how many questions you have and that you would like to, that we can give you more time in order to express your reflections. I can assure you that this is just the beginning. This is the first information event, but along all the project that it will take several and several months, we are going to touch base with you and we are going to have separate and bilateral meeting in case it is necessary in order to address all of your concerns and suggestions. Saying this, please, Andre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Diego, and well, good morning, afternoon to everybody. I'm very happy to be able to connect with the Latvian academic community again, and I hope that very soon we'll be able to meet face to face. It would be much easier for all of us. As a way of introducing the discussion on career models, I just wanted to note that what I thought was really the most interesting part of the previous discussion is that basically it's the question of the link between research and teaching and how to manage that. And it is, in a sense, a deeper question about the role of universities and also the shape of the system. Whether you should have research tracks and research institutes separate from universities or not. I think those are going to be really also very important questions to address as you are envisaging how career frameworks and career models can be changed. It's absolutely essential, I think, to have this deeper also reflection. If we could show the slides, please. '31. Yeah, thank you. Yes, please, the next one. So what we thought we would discuss with you now is about career models and in fact about tenure track, just to continue to build on Elias's presentation from this morning. And this is just a little bit of a refresher of what we have been talking about this morning. As you know, in about 50% of European countries, academic staff are civil servants, and therefore academic career frameworks are associated with the career systems within the public service system as a whole. And there are two main models in continental Europe about the civil service. One is the vacancy-based model, in which career advancement takes place through an application to vacant positions. And theoretically, this means that one can apply to any vacant position, or a promotion model, a career-based model, where promotion is achieved when internal requirements are met. Sometimes it's just a question of staying in a job for long enough. And one usually starts theoretically again at the first step. The tenure track is a combination of the two. And as we have seen, it has various variants, including in one country, such as Finland. So Elias showed that tenure track can be conceived in different ways in 3 different universities. And if we can go quickly through the next 3 slides, please. We saw how it is in Aalto University, which I think corresponds most closely to the American model. And then we have another example in the next slide from Eastern Finland University. And then in the next one, in Tampere University, again, different models. So the questions that I would like, the first question that I would like us to discuss is your experience and your definition of what is tenure track. You've been, I'm sure many of you have been exposed in other universities elsewhere in Europe to what people have called tenure. And it would be really interesting to hear some of those examples. And also, if you can comment on where you think are the best examples that you've seen elsewhere. So I open the floor to a discussion.
Thank you, Andre. Please, to our counterparts in Latvia, please feel free to jump.
If it's possible to ask, thank you, Andre, for opening discussion on these issues. I just would like to mention that in Latvia we are now in some kind of quite interesting position, because we have not like a defined tenure track at this moment by law, but the institution of tenure track nowadays are being defined by the ruling of Constitutional Court, because Constitutional Court changed law on the higher education institutions in order to avoid a 6-year term for associated professors and professors. And it's in some sense quite a challenging situation for higher education institutions, because from the one side, we should do our business in accordance with court ruling. We could not impose this 6-year time on agreements. In the same time, also, as we see, government and is trying to impose new reform on tenure track, and so we are under among the two skills at this moment. It's like a pressure of the order of law, rule, and rule of law is always a very important thing. At the same time, there is also this reform on tenure tracks that's being started, and we are a little bit confused at how this new reform will go in accordance with court ruling. So this is the biggest challenge, I think, in the field of higher education nowadays.
Can you give us a bit more information, Andres, about what is exactly happening? I mean, what are the changes that you see? We have heard about the Constitutional Court ruling, but what other changes are you talking about? I mean, is it institutions? Those are institutions that are making changes, or the universities?
Yes, I believe that institutions, higher education institutions, are obligated to make change. For example, if you have anybody who is in the position of associated professor or professor, and the 6-year times is being ended. So previously, we started to organize a competition on the open position, on the position of associated professor or professor. Nowadays, higher education institutions is being pressed in the situation that anybody who is in the position of associated professor or professor could stay on this ruling of Constitutional Court and said a 6-year term is unconstitutional because our rule of work defined 5-year terminated agreement like being possible in the field of working practice. And in such sense, like anybody who is in the position of associated professor or professor is actually like on the tenure track, because terminated agreement is unconstitutional. So several universities, for example, Latvian University and, for example, Art Academy, made decision that everybody who is on these associated professor or professor positions are nowadays being without this terminated agreements, but we imposed our own internal evaluation procedures, not like as people end their working paths, but like a beer competition and excellence in order. So we are imposed some kind of internal evaluation procedures, but without ending of career path, but in order to help to improve career path for academics. So I believe that many higher education institutions are implementing their own internal reform of academic staff now at this moment.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, then competition is no longer possible after 6 years. And but at the same time, you're feeling pressure to be evaluating internally your staff and then proposing ways of improving, proposing them developmental activities. In fact.
Yeah, thank you. You are quite right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Right. Well, but I mean, you know, so in a sense, it is positive that you are now looking at development, but there must be a negative side to it, as at the same time that you are not able to. You don't have any probationary period when you are hiring somebody. You cannot hire them for a short trial period.
Actually, that's something that I believe nowadays lawmakers are trying to implement in the law of their higher education institutions. Mm-hmm. They would amend for law in order to implement this first period like some kind of trial period for anybody who will be elected on the position of associated professor or professor. But of course, at this particular actual moment, there is no, in legal means, some kind of trial period at this moment. In this moment, we are under the ruling of constitutional court.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Can I, Andre, jump in?
Yeah.
Really shortly here. So I think this is really interesting when it comes to Latvian career framework or the time before this ruling. So I think it was the only country in Europe, or maybe there was one country in addition to Latvia where you didn't have permanent positions at all. And this is quite interesting actually. And now you are saying that you are in a confusing situation while now you have the constitutional ruling that is kind of providing those permanent positions for the institutions. But just reflect into the Finnish situation again. So actually Finnish institutions, they have been in this confusing situation now for more than 10 years, because our legislation doesn't actually, it doesn't include anything about tenure track. It doesn't have trial times at all. And now also we are not actually dealing with constitutional court, but normal court rulings about those trial periods. And that is how organically our tenure track is developing. We get some resolutions from the court, and then it is developed within the institutional settings. And my recommendation, and also our recommendation when we were doing the evaluation, was that there should be some kind of a national framework to actually recognize a tenure track as a legal framework, or as a different kind of as a legal way of defining the contract. So I think it might be worth considering in the national level whether there should be also kind of a legal framework for this tenure track positions and also for these trial periods, because otherwise, well, the kind of long-term planning is really difficult. But this is just reflections from Finland.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really a point.
Well, and suppose that if we were to focus a little bit on this trial period, how long should it be in your view? And I'm talking, I mean, to the whole audience, not just to Andris, but everybody else. What should be a good probationary period in your view? And have you seen good examples elsewhere?
Can I jump in? Hi, I'm the second representative of the Young Researchers Association of Latvia.
Yeah.
And I have some experience from my PhD years in the US. I just wanted to say that I think as an association, and I myself too, we agreed that this three-step tenure track model with assistant, associate, and a full professor sounds quite good. We think in terms of years, from 3 to 6 years, there are people who are really quick at getting all the requirements done, and people who maybe need more time, and it's also specific for each each field. So it's hard to just say just 5 years. But then one more thing that I would like to add is based on my experience, and also I think my colleagues also agree on that once you have this full permanent position as a professor, there still should be some basic requirements that you need to fulfill. I myself had this experience at my university in the US, where we had a professor who at the end of his career just didn't want to do any research, any teaching, any service, any administrative service. And it was really frustrating for all the colleagues because he wouldn't pitch in for anything and got constantly bad reviews for teaching, and you couldn't fire him. So there should be something that you need to fulfill as a full tenured professor, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. Any reactions to this proposal? So it's a three-step proposal like in the US, 3 to 6 years probation or trial period, depending on the field. And once the professor reaches a professor level, permanent level, they should still meet some requirements. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to guarantee the quality of the institution, whether it's for the research or the teaching. How would people react to this proposal? How do people react to this proposal?
Can I sort of react? Andres?
Yes.
Really sorry. That's really shortly. I think there was really good comments, especially about this flexibility within the time span of the trial periods, because that was one of the really important aspects in the Finnish discussion as well. That first of all, there was kind of an idea from the research academic community side that, okay, you are trying to reduce the payment for professors by starting tenure track positions in which you cannot be promoted earlier than actually the period is planned to be. And now, as you can see from the recommendation of the Union for Professors, there is a kind of strong recommendation that you can ask for the review before your period is full. So you can be evaluated, let's say after 2 years, if you qualify for the next step. But then there comes a risk that there are evaluations all the time going on. So then there is also kind of institutional regulations that you can ask it only for once. So you cannot ask it every year. So it's either after your full period or then you can ask it for once. So this is really an important question. Another really short reaction to this performance evaluation of full professors. Now the question is whether it should be part of the tenure track system or whether it should be part of normal managerial practices. Yeah. That as an employer, university can expect something also from the full professors. And this has been the solution in Finland, but of course it's easier to say than to actually do. So there are practical problems related to this ideal that then the dean comes and says, well, Professor X, please perform. So there are problems associated to that, but it's a question whether it should be part of normal management or part of a career system.
Do you find, Elias, that in those discussions, I mean, when this comes up, questions about academic freedom, and you know, it can be it becomes a very sensitive conversation.
Exactly. And it's quite difficult, for instance, in some fields where you're writing monographs. So one can say for 5 years that I'm making this study and it will be published after 7 years or so. So it's easy to say in practice that it's part of the management practices, but then in real life, it's quite difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you. Other comments?
Maybe one from me, very technical regarding this, let's say 6-year evaluation. Assuming that we have a professor tenure track and they are evaluated every 6 years, I think it's very important also to take into account that some of these professors, maybe it's not a large number, but still they could be at administrative positions like deans, you know, and then as a dean, they can stay there for, let's say, 4-8 years. And of course, they will not be able to comply with high research and I mean, let's say, production standards. And I think this should be also taken into account, because what we want is that the deans, they have a good managerial skills, but they also have a still touch with education and research. So we introducing this system in our university, and we came across this issue. Just a comment.
Right. Yeah, that's I think is a very important, it's a very important point. And it goes back again to the issue of flexibility that I noted at the beginning of our conversation this morning. I remember listening to the rector of Aarhus in Denmark, who was saying that they had developed 54 different contract types in his university to deal with all the types of administrative and also academic staff, and to give the flexibility to staff and the flexibility to the university to do some talent management. But that, of course, requires a very strong HR office. And so I was wondering if perhaps we could move the discussion to the question of whether a tenure track should be, in your view, introduced in Latvia, or if you would prefer another type of model.
Thank you, Andre. But I think that before going to this question, I think, Elias, you wanted to say something or not?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just feel so excited about this discussion. So when it comes to the management position, this is exactly really an important question. So that's also something that should be really carefully considered, whether these management practices and administrative duties should be considered as part of also the tenure track development and also part of the evaluation of academics, or whether there should be kind of management contracts for managers. And this then creates hybrid professionals. It creates managers who are actually professional in managing universities, and they kind of get detached from the work of normal or ordinary professor. And this is the tendency that you can see now in Finland and in many other countries. And I don't necessarily see it as a positive development all the time, because sometimes then you get those managers who are not really anymore kind of, they don't have the living contact to the academic work. But this is an eternal discussion, but it's really important to have this discussion. And I know in Latvia, you have now in the legislation, you have the kind of, at least the minimum salaries for different academic management positions. And they are kind of part of the current framework. But this is really an important thing that you should consider, whether it should be detached from these models or whether it should be part of the academic career development, administrative duties, management duties, and other position of trust. Really an important question that should be highlighted, especially from the perspective of our head of unit. So, yeah.
Very good point, Elias. Thank you. And that reminds me of a case of one university that had a very traditional type of promotion system, which was giving weight 40% to research, 40% to teaching. And then the rest was for administrative services, or what they called university service, as they do in the US, for instance. And when we were looking at the university and its decision-making processes, we realized that they had tons of committees. And when we asked them questions about why so many committees, they said they thought it was precisely because of the stress in the promotion process on administrative service, that everybody wanted to be on committees. So, you know, they would create lots of committees and stay on them just so that they can show that they are doing university service. So I suppose every policy has its downside. Yes. Okay, well, you know, then I asked a question earlier, which is, should tenure track be established in Latvia? Do you have any views on that? Or would you prefer to see other types of models?
Are there any other models for universities? I don't know. I'm not sure. Of course, the system what we are having now is that you know, you have to compete every day for new project. I think it has also advantage on one hand because it keeps you, you know, fit, so to say, but then it has a drawback because you, I mean, as a professor, have I think objective difficulties to look into the long-term research and long-term commitments, which creates a situation that, let's say, promoting high-level research, I mean, long-term research is a challenge. So I think that, as we discussed earlier, they still need a balance. I don't know, it's 70 or 30%, but I think this is important to have some balance. But there is also need to have these permanent positions, at least at some degree, to promote exactly this. So the professors, they have more time to look into the long-term research and also to commit themselves more to education. Because if you are a professor and you apply for the project all the time, then of course your, let's say, attention towards teaching is very different.
Right.
If you are, as a professor, are asked to give lectures, and this is within your contract, then this would allow to link good research with university students, and in this way to do what university is supposed to do. So my opinion is that I mean, there should be some balance, as Elias was mentioning. I don't know percentage-wise what is the balance, but there should be some permanent and some, let's say, competition-based positions. That's right. My personal opinion.
Yeah, and that also evokes the notion of funding, research funding, and different kind of schemes for research funding, so that you could have blue sky research and, you know, more what you call long-term research. Agrita, did you want to say something? You have your hands up.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrea.
Oh,
I'm
it's
absolutely
Andres.
sure
Okay,
that.
Andres. Yes. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely sure that we really need some tenure track model in Latvia, and at the same time we also need some flexibility in order to develop the best and most excellent academic staff. And the one particular aspect tenure track that should be mentioned, it's also absolutely interconnected with the notion of academic freedom, because academic staff should feel secure herself or himself to develop and express the sometimes most extraordinary ideas, but you know, freedom of ideas is core of development of higher education system and the system of knowledge in society. So I really believe in the necessity of tenure track in the higher education institutions.
Okay. Do you see other reasons for establishing tenure track besides the very important one that you mentioned, to ensure academic freedom?
Also, care should be developed in the ways like academic staff would like to invest. Pasaules very precisely pointed out in the long-term research, and it's the same logic also in the field of art and design, to develop long-term projects, not short-term projects, but long-term projects, and where probably this outcome of projects are not in the 2 or 3 years, but in 7, 8 or 10 years time, to really invest in such long-term projects. It's really necessity for tenure track at this.
Thank you. Brigitta, do you have things in the chat for us?
Yes, yes. I have Agrita with raised hand.
Agrita.
Yes, well, nice to see and hear everybody.
Very nice to see you.
Yes, you know, I'm at the side where I kind of question whether we need the tenure track or not, and I think I can honestly say that I can see the value of this exercise for us if and only if we focus on development of excellence in our system. And we put the research at the heart of the tenure track. And we ensure that a certain small number of best academic personnel are the ones who receive that tenured position. So then I see that we really have a chance of renewing our core academic community. And I think if that is the shared vision where we are going, then I think it's really good. And I think it's doable given the way how we have framed our national development plan, and also the recently launched research programs where our academic personnel participates, and sort of, you know, and if we link that. Yeah, I'm already repeating myself, but if we link that to research, then yes.
What would be in your view the place of teaching in that?
Of course, there is a place of teaching, but the reason why I'm stressing the research part is because we were so low on the funding for research. Mm-hmm. Teaching was the core business of academia. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so we are kind of starting from different position as probably many countries elsewhere. It's not that we are short in teachers, it's we are short in research skills.
So it's a question of rebalancing.
Yes, I would say so. But first of all, it's a question of excellence.
Yes. Elias wanted to say something. Thank you, Elias.
Yeah,
thank you.
Really good comments, and I think that's one of the most important things that needs to be really discussed in details. What will be the volume of the whole exercise, and what will be the share of those who will have the tenure track positions, or whether it will be the only way of professorship. But when it comes to this research, kind of really like research-oriented tenure track positions, so at least two things should be taken into account. So if there is no kind of continuous increasing of funding, so it means that those persons with the research, profiling research positions will end up to be full professors, and they will then carry out also the task for teaching as the full professor. So they will drop somewhere. There needs to be place for those persons. And then another thing that needs to be taken into account is that once you employ a person to be an assistant professor in the first step of tenure track, and it's highly research-based, so then probably he has a narrow vision. He is looking only to the associate professorship and professorship, and forgets often what is happening around him or her. So the teaching activities, management duties, administrative issues, work well-being, and those things, community issues. And that might create a situation in which the tasks that would be normally meant for someone are then pushed aside if there are no external positions, externally funded positions that are kind of in top of the normal personnel structure. And this happened in Finland, and there was a lot of discussions on this. So this is really important to take into consideration. If there are external funding, then you can have really research-only positions, but then they will end up to be professors forever, basically, for 20, 25 years, and the funding will end. If there are no specific funding for those positions, so then it means that they are usually going towards the research aims, and other tasks are pushed aside for other persons. And these are kind of two phenomena that needs to be taken into account. Of course, in some disciplines, like in natural sciences, technical fields, so this is not maybe a huge problem because you are also teaching when you are doing a lab work, for instance. But in some other fields, like social sciences, this is really an issue. That's the sort of quite a long.
Thank you very much. Any comments or reaction to those, to these two observations? So what I take out of this is that we're going to, you know, in the next steps, we will have to tease out how the weighing between research and teaching and administrative duties should be thought through, and what should be the principles behind, and the pros and cons of different options.
Yeah, I think
Brigitta?
we have one question from the Latvian Trade Union of Education and Science employees, and they clearly refer to the workload. They ask what components should constitute the workload of an university pedagogue, but we can also rephrase it as an academic who works at the university. So what component should constitute the workload?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's exactly what needs to, yeah, that's the discussion that needs to take place. I totally agree with that. And I don't know, I mean, we can listen to suggestions from the audience, because we really want you to, you know, to tell us what you feel would be right for you. There are, what we can do is provide examples and show what is happening elsewhere, knowing that in fact, you know, there are no ideal situations, but there is an optimal situation for Latvia that we need to find, an optimal solution for Latvia that we need to find. But, you know, the solutions need to come from the sector. And one thing that you could think about is whether the weight between teaching and research and administrative services should be everywhere the same, or if each institution should decide depending on its own profile. Mm-hmm. And that is also a very important discussion, I think, to have.
Yes. And this is, may I add that this is why we are talking about wider framework, where there could be different and several models that our institutions could adapt to their situation and so on, so that there is a variety of options. But of course, it's extremely difficult to make it fair, to make it transparent, and so, but that's why we are here. And also, Gunter Skittenbergs have noted a very good comment in our chat box, and he says that another thing to note with the Constitutional Court ruling, the associate professors and professors become permanent, while researcher track, senior positions, so senior researcher, still have 6-year re-election. Knowing that many professors are also senior researchers, this makes another interesting artifact in the system. Yeah, so from one side, the same person has kind of tenure, yeah, de facto, and from other side, he has to be re-elected. So this is the mess that we have to go through and make a good system.
Okay, that's a very good thing to know. Elias?
That's totally comment. So that's also something that should be discussed in detail. So when we are discussing about positions, and when we are discussing about persons and titles, and when we are discussing about tasks, because Latvian system is quite peculiar from many perspectives, that you have individual who has several positions, research positions, teaching positions, professorships, managerial positions. And in a way, as a proxy or kind of as an assumption in these models that we are kind of discussing here, there is an assumption that an individual has one position and has one title. And an individual then has a workload that can be then divided into components. And there can be different ways of evaluating those components if promoted. So in a way, we have this as an assumption all the time. But in reality of Latvia, the situation is totally different, as we learned when we were doing the previous study, and as all of you know. So this is really something that needs to be discussed and taken into account when planning a framework, because if the assumption is wrong, so then the framework will fail, because it doesn't make any kind of, there are no logics behind the framework.
Yeah.
And this is one of the really central issues here.
Very, very important point. And I think we're about to end this session, Diego, if I, unless Brigitte has more questions or no, okay. And
we still have 2 minutes, okay. And then we will do a small break again. So okay. 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, very good. No, I just wanted to build up on Elias's comment, because I think it's really very important. I mean, the notion that, and what we used to call, this basket in Latvia of, each individual puts in his or her basket different kinds of positions. This puts you all in very difficult situations, as Brigitte was pointing out. You can be evaluated every 6 years as a researcher, but not evaluated as a teacher every 6 years. And when I look at European trends, what I find one of the most interesting European trends happened actually in Finland, in Denmark, it is, they are trying to implement that in France with not much success. But it is about bringing together teaching and learning in one institution, and looking at at each individual staff in terms of his or her workloads and the emphasis on research and teaching and how it can vary over time. I think that is really the way to the future. And in a sense, you would be, as a country, well positioned to do something really interesting and new because of your starting point. The starting point, you all agree that it needs to change. And that's really a very good place to be, in a sense, to move ahead. So I hope that, in the next few months, we'll be able to progress in those discussions. And I'd like to thank you for your contribution.
Thank you very much, Andre. So now I think we are on track with the agenda. So let's have a 10 minutes break, no more than 10, please. So we can come back 11:50. And then Elias will finish with the session regarding to staff categories. So see you in 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Jā, paldies visiem.
Okay, welcome back. We are going to begin the last session on staff categories moderated by Elias, but let me raise two issues first, and then I know that Brigitta will raise also a question done by Agrita, if I'm not wrong. So first thing, I am aware that you receive a survey monkey in order to, where you have a lot of questions to reply. Please feel comfortable to do it. It is very important to us that you could reply these questions. We give you the option that you could reply it in English or you could reply it in Latvian. So no excuse. you can do it, but again, please do it, because as you see, this is very important for us to help you to do the task. Second, Brigitta mentioned to me that very soon the Ministry of Education will set up a special page in the website where they are going to put everything regarding this project, the outputs, the materials, the timeline, etc. So I think this is a great news. Thank you very much, Brigitta, on this. And before giving the floor to Elias, please, Brigitta, mention the question of Agrita. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. Yes, we are working on that information that will be published on our website very soon. So hopefully next week. And then we got a comment from Agrita that we should note. I think it's a very good point. And she writes that I think that research and teaching integration should be coupled with the workload question. Even in flexible arrangement, there is a 40-hour work week, of course, so the teaching load should be reasonably limited. Given the shortage of staff, it is not an easy task for deans to ensure the teaching process. Now, with the pandemic, the teaching load has increased a lot because of the online and mixed instruction, which requires much more individual assistance and engagement with students. Yes, absolutely agree. We see that all over the world. I think that our experts will comment and agree with this point. That's the issue, not only in Latvian higher education system, but all around the world. Yeah. So any comments?
Thank you, Brigitta. So with this question, let's open the floor to Elias.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So maybe I can first try to comment on the question. So really a good question, and let's start with these exceptional times, this crisis. So this is something that I have no answers for that. So maybe in the future that the work that we are now doing is going to help us when we have more digitalized solutions. So maybe it will ease up our burden at least a little bit in the future. But now on current times, so we are just, working, most of us, on our limits, and it's quite difficult to kind of oversee or foresee this kind of, anticipate this kind of crisis. So this is something that is really difficult to actually answer, but it's important, of course, to take into account. When it comes to this work week and the load, 40 hours workload per week, and the division between the research and teaching duties, as Andre said, so that's an institutional balancing activity, and there needs to be different kind of flexible solutions. But of course, something that we can say from our experience, at least here in Finland, so is that especially if you start transferring professors' positions into tenure track positions. So let's say that there is a professor of chemistry retiring or leaving from the workplace if there are no retirement age. So, and then you employ a new one as an assistant professor that should be then start building his career or her career from assistant to associate to professor. So in a way, she or he is in the impossible situation. He or she needs to be qualified to be a professor and take all of the roles and responsibilities of a professor without experience of a professor. So start from the scratch and at the same time qualify. And this has been a huge issue in Finland. So basically you need to have units that are big enough to actually overcome these issues. And even if you have big units, so it might be really difficult if you have small disciplines to actually replace a professor's position with a tenure track position. You need to have really good financial planning to overcome kind of these transition periods, that you can have an assistant professor working a little bit, or let's say five years at the same time when the professor is kind of shifting to retirement. So this is really a difficult task actually to deal with. But yeah, these are my first reflections to the question. Margarita, was it even close what you were thinking about, or you're laughing? So probably I answered the wrong question, but anyhow, I answered the question. Okay, let's continue. And maybe
it seems yes. It seems yes.
Yeah. We can continue. We can get back to this question also after this or during this session. Okay, but let's go to the slides then and start moderating the first or last session. In a way, first session about the model as such. Can someone say that? Yes, great. The slide number 37. Yes. So now you can see we are starting to repeat ourselves. This is the third time when we have the same slide. And this is for purpose. There is a purpose for that we have the same slide again. So you have your own framework in Latvia. That is quite peculiar in a way, that you have had those positions that are re-evaluated every 6 years, and you didn't have the permanent positions. But most of the systems in Europe and globally as well, they are somehow based on vacancies, open positions, applications, open calls, or then an entrance point and then promotions, or then you have part of the positions or all of the positions for professors established as a tenure track position in which you can then be promoted. And these are really basic things, and I think Andre was excellently describing these differences between the models, but this is kind of the most important thing. An assumption that you have some kind of a combination of these systems. Another assumption is then that you have actually one person per one position. But let's now go to the next slide, and that will be the final slide of the this webinar. So here is kind of our first understanding of the current system, and then just really a simple or really a basic, maybe a little bit too simplistic ideas how the future might look like. So we are basing this idea on this European four-stage career model that was also in the previous slide. So there are 4 types of positions. There are junior positions, there are postdoctoral positions, there are independent researchers positions, and then there are leading academic positions. And this is becoming kind of a, not maybe a rule, but kind of a typical way of defining different positions. And also some of the European funding instruments are following this 4 stages of researchers' career. And it's also applied in research institutions in some of the countries, and also for the teaching-oriented positions. So this is just a way of kind of putting these positions into 4 different steps. And here we have now also then highlighted your current titles, and be free to comment and be free to kind of stop me and add something if we have misunderstood something. But here is our reading of the current position, current titles. So you have junior positions, there are research assistants and assistants, and then there are PhD stipendiates or PhD scholarship holders doing junior work, usually not holding a PhD, but working towards the PhD with research or teaching duties, sometimes doing the PhD research aside, or sometimes more full time. Then there are these postdoctoral positions, docent position, researcher's position, and then postdocs in some cases. And then the lecturer's position is somewhere in between of these two. You may have lecturers with qualifications or without qualifications, if we have understood it correctly. Then there are independent positions, associate professor's position, and senior researchers, as it was quite nicely added by some of you, that actually these are kind of positions on the same level, but they have different basic assumptions. Associate professorship being now permanent position because of the constitutional ruling, and senior researcher being evaluated every 6th year. And then there are professor's positions. And now, kind of our major question for you for the next, let's say, a year or so, a few months, is that whether this current structure should be transferred to open positions, vacancies, a system in which you have certain categories of positions, and then you apply to each and every position. Once position is opened, everyone can apply. No promotions at all. So promotions would be impossible. And this may sound weird, but you have in Europe many cases in which actually promotions are possible only through open calls, open positions, by applying to the next level when there is an open position. This is possible. This would be kind of one type of kind of poor model, or one type of a model. Then there are these tenure track positions. It can be applied to all positions, that once you are selected to your postdoctoral position, you can be promoted regardless of your position type, or then it can be applied only for limited number of positions. And then you can be like it was proposed by some of you, that then you can be promoted if you are on research intensive position that has been, you know, selected, that it's only for the best of the best. And then you have qualifications related to these different positions. And then of course you may have other ways of promotions as well. In the title, in traditional track-based vacancies column, you may have also promotions. So let's take this as kind of a starting point. It's really a simplistic framework. It's just, you know, putting different titles into the boxes without actually knowing quite well the institutional circumstances. Of course, we do have some experience already, but still. And let's start the discussion now, whether this kind of a, okay, there's already questions about these positions. Yeah, let's get back to those quite soon. So whether this kind of a framework should be applied to the board of the sectors, meaning universities and research institutes, and whether there should be two different sets of titles. Let's say lecturers and researchers, professors and research professors, or whether there should be only one set of titles. And how you see the integration of this framework. And as I told you earlier, in Finland, that was the basic idea, that you can then compare the different titles. The framework was used to compare titles in different sectors, but actually it failed. But whether you see it important that you have this kind of a framework combining these two sectors, and if you see it important, do you think that there should be two sets of titles and positions, or whether it would be enough to have just one type of titles to both of the sectors? And now you have different legislation, so this might be quite difficult to actually start discussing, but let's start the discussion from here. Any reflections about the integration and the overall applicability of this kind of framework for higher education and then for research institutions.
Thank you, Elias. So the floor is open for anyone who would like to do questions.
We already have a comment in our chat box that in current Latvian system, researcher is often in the first career step, and then docent is rather R3, research steps 3, and postdoc is normally a lecturer. So meaning, after you get your PhD, you work as a lecturer. Which it is in some cases, but in many cases, no, you are a docent then. Any comments about this?
Yes, I can add. Because for lecturer, you don't need PhD degree, but for docent, you need it. And this is a very important difference if you describe current Latvian system. And therefore, docent is left from Soviet times, and it is similar like associate professor. But okay, there was no intention to delete this position because for docents, normally universities pay the same lower salary for the same job like for associate professor. That means there is, I see here indeed a problem with this position. It might be maybe cancelled or renamed as associate professor, but normally docents are doing the same job like associate professors. They have PhD degree, they have this experience, they have PhD students, etc., etc. So I think it is rather the independent third row here in the current system.
And in the next column, there are just ideas what those positions could be called in English in future, but this is just based on some international examples. So whether the docent would be then postdoctoral research or something else. So that's really a good question.
Elias, I have a question regarding this assistant professor, not associate. I think Gita meant assistant professor, not associated. This is two different categories. So what does assistant, I mean, in general, it's just a naming, because you can, sometimes we name docent assistant professor when you have to write on your business cards, right? Because not everyone understands what docent means. So in assistant professor case, so what is the difference between associated and an assistant as you see it? I mean, a question to Elias.
This is really good question, and this comes to the translation issue, and it has been also really a huge discussion in the Finnish case. So assistant professor in this table, so it means the first step of tenure track position with the kind of promise that you can be promoted if you qualify to associate professor and then to professor. An associate professor is quite often it's permanent position already in many systems, not in all of the systems, but in many systems. So it's a tenured position already. An assistant professor is a position that comes often after your postdoc actually. And then it's the first position from which you can then be tenured. And this is really also something that you should really carefully consider, because if you have this translation from docent already to assistant professor, so how to make this distinction between assistant professors if you would have a tenure track and then docents in English. And in Finland, it ended up without national framework and translations, it ended up in the wild situation where you have different kind of translation and different kind of names in English and Finnish, and it's a mess. So in a way, as I see it, but maybe it's just too ideal or optimistic, I would like to see a kind of a model in which you have national loose framework for different positions and then the translation of those positions in the English. So, but you see now the difference. Assistant professorship, first step on the tenure track with a promise to get promoted if you qualify. A docent could be a position that doesn't have this promise to be, or postdoctoral researcher or lecturer. So there is a difference. And now for you, it's quite difficult actually to make this distinction because you have had those 6-year evaluations and you didn't have the permanent positions like in most of the countries. So yeah, it is confusing from that.
Elias, thank you. We have raised hands from Agrita and Gunters. Agrita?
Yes, thank you. The question was whether there is a room for 2 sets of positions. And I would say that yes, in a university setting and in a university that is large enough setting, there's, in my opinion, then there certainly is a room of 2 positions. And probably, you know, we kind of understand that there will always be people who will be only teaching stuff. In our case, RSU, we are a medical school, and that also means that a lot of our teaching personnel is also clinicians, and for them, they usually are lecturers, or they can be also in a professor track. But there will be always this sort of clinical or industry professor, if you will, you can translate them that well too. By the same kind of way of thinking, there will always be also some people in institutes that do only research and are not engaged in teaching, or are engaged in teaching to a certain extent by supporting the PhD work in the labs, or primarily working in projects, maybe involving students, but sort of their small proportion always will be there. And I think for that matter, it makes sense to keep the 2 sets in parallel, and probably focus on the ways how those sets intertwine and how those sets complement each other.
That's really an excellent comment. So, and now the question actually that I have for you is that whether there should be then, for both of these tracks with different titles, whether there should be tenure track positions for both of these promotion schemes, or whether there should be, or this tenure track position should be always on that research-oriented track, or whether it should be a third different type of a track, that you have teachers track, you have researchers track, and then you have tenure track. Because all of these are possible. You have countries in which you have different types of tracks, or then you always have kind of the tenure track as part of those tracks. I don't know whether you get the question.
Yes, and first thing that comes in mind, there is this discussion about establishing core facilities in research, meaning that there is this research infrastructure in which there are people who sort of know that infrastructure and can provide that service that comes with this infrastructure. And those would be the ones that are those permanent positions. Whether that should be called, you know, tenure track, I don't know, but certainly those are permanent positions that cannot be sort of supported on this rolling schedule of projects. And I'm not sure if I answered, but that's.
I think we are kind of now opening the discussion here, because these are really crucial questions. So how to actually, if it's always kind of in many different settings, I have seen it that this is really an easy kind of an easy solution to develop or to start a tenure track. But once you start seeing it as part of the overall career framework, it gets much more difficult if you don't see them as a separate positions with external funding. if they are just separate positions with external funding, it's quite easy. But when you have to see it as part of the normal system, it gets quite tricky. And now I think this is exactly the most important question that should be discussed today and also in the future. So whether there should be a separate tenure track or whether it's a mechanism that can lead for promotion, a normal track, or something else.
May I shortly intervene from also RSU? Tatiana is my name. So hello.
Hello.
Hello. Actually, I don't think that I have a lot of suggestions, but just some reflections on what I've heard so far. I think that first of all, we have to be aware about the framework or borders we are speaking about. Latvia is really a small country, and human resources are unfortunately limited. Of course, we are talking about international scope and we should move towards this direction. But first and foremost, we have to think about our own young generation to promote, to involve them in academic career and promote this academic career. Therefore, by saying this, I just want to say that I don't think that we have to fragment or separate different kinds of tasks and give a lot of different names in these stages of career. If I may just, I myself started my academic career in 1983 as PhD student, and in 2002 I was first promoted or elected as professor. So it took almost 20 years. If we are in this project talking about the attractiveness of the profession, it means that most probably we want to shorten this but in line with hiring, not hiring, but we want to make these duties and fulfillment of these duties in an excellent level. Yeah, and therefore I think that if we talk about tenure, as my understanding goes, tenure is like, like a reward at the peak of the career. For instance, I am 48, I'm 50, and I'm full of, I've got good results and outputs, and therefore I get this promotion to tenure track. Then I find this attractive. This is how I see this project and maybe some result. Therefore, I don't think that we have to separate and divide very different stages. Of course, there is always a basic question whether the faculty at the universities are research-oriented or teaching-oriented. There will be differences, but the requirements should be as high for both these positions. Yeah, thank you. But it's really very enjoyable to take part in this discussion and to learn more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to give floor to Gunters, who is waiting with his hand raised, and then maybe we can answer these comments in a consolidated way. Please.
Yep. Hello again. We had a discussion in the Association of Latvian Young Scientists about these things, and maybe I want to share a bit what we came up with. The conclusions on our side were a bit different from what Agrita was proposing, so that's why it might be interesting to see it from a different perspective. So we definitely saw that it's the most important that we go for these full-time positions that eventually make some kind of a ladder, call it either a tenure track or a promotion system or something. It's maybe not as essential that they are mostly full-time positions and with some perspective and expectations. So we thought that it's impossible to have only teaching full-time positions, because then that personnel will be overwhelmed with teaching duties. And on the other hand, the research kind of keeps the person up to date. So we thought that for every teaching person, there should be some up-to-date part, which normally would be research. Therefore, these full-time positions would be a bit of teaching and more of research. The exceptions from this could be for those people that come from what you can call industry, either it's a medical sector or some courts or maybe libraries or something else. There are different examples where you can have professionals that are could be very good academic stuff on the teaching part, because they do daily stuff on the things that are essential in these directions. But yeah, otherwise we thought that the priorities for those positions that have teaching and research, and if there is enough of funding inside the system, then we could have also research only positions, but this could be a single track, and then you can call it assistant professor and research-based assistant professor, and then associate and full professor. So these were our ideas. And my question would be, maybe as you know the systems much better, is there any country where you have only this single track system with no division between teaching aligned and research aligned positions?
So for sure there are systems in which you have only one set of titles, but then usually you do the division within the individual contracts. And I think this is really an important discussion, because as an assumption, as discussed already earlier, so there is kind of an idea that there would be full-time positions. And once a person applies for a project, so there is no need for new title or new position, but it's just kind of agreed on an annual working time discussions that, okay, you will be doing this project with the same salary, no additional salary. That also comes then to the package. So you will be doing this work for 20% of your kind of annual working time. And this is kind of the overall assumption behind of these different types of a model, that you have annual working hours, let's say 1,600 hours or something like that. And then you will be assigned with different tasks. Sometimes there are more research, sometimes there are more teaching, and then if there are promotion letters, so then this is also kind of applied according to your workloads and according to your design tasks. So in ideal work, it would function like this, but in practice, usually the evaluation is done based on your research merits, even though you would be doing a lot of teaching. And that's, of course, maybe a model that someone wouldn't like to, if starting from scratch, to develop, that you have research only merits, and then you have positions that are teaching, almost only teaching positions. So that's a little bit unfair. But this is really an important question now, this full-time or part-time, whether it should be kind of a starting point that you have full-time positions, and in the departments, there will be a discussions about assignments of the tasks. And that makes kind of the different game board for you, if I can say in that way. That's really an important thing. Then another thing is this, it's quite nicely put within the first comment about tenure as a reward in the end of the career ladder. And that's something that it's somehow, for many of us, it's kind of, we take that as a granted, that tenure is something that is in the end of the career ladder. That's the permanent position, it's a reward. But for instance, in Estonia, if I have understood correctly, their system, all of those persons who are on the tenure track, that is mostly a promotion scheme, are already in the permanent positions. So they do not have fixed term positions at all. So this is something that we take for granted, that it should be, as a final step, there should be, or as an associate professor or professor, that should be a reward, but in some systems, that's not the case. So there are also variations. So that's quite interesting, but this is something that should be also defined and highlighted in the model. Whether it's based on permanent position, which position should be fixed time, which position should be full-time, permanent, which position should be part-time, which full-time, and then what is the division between teaching and research, and how to integrate these two things. And then to add on this, and I would like to ask your reflections here. So should the same framework be applicable for research institutes and higher education institutions? Should you have the same kind of integration of tasks and division of labor within both of the institutional types, or whether this should be discussed with different titles and different vocabulary? This is also a question for you. So how you see the integration between the career framework in higher education and in research institutes, and what kind of challenges you foresee there?
May I just add? to discussion. I think from university perspective, I think the principle that you have so many positions, like you are researcher, assistant, maybe even docent, I think this is not a good idea. So the way you propose here is really simplify and try to merge research with teaching. And I think this is, at least for universities, as I see it, it's the right way to go. Of course, how you call it, it's kind of a bit semantic. I mean, it's what do you mean by professor? Is it the professor the person who is doing only research, or is a professor who is doing both? And so it depends what do we mean by that. But I think that title assistant professor, which basically implies that you are supporting research, you are not professor per se, but you are supporting research. It kind of goes in the right way, because it's what university is supposed to do. I mean, they should base the teaching on the research output. So again, I think it's from university perspective, I think the way to simplify the system to make it as a single contract, as it was mentioned before. And then, of course, at some point, you have a probability to get the tenure track. So you get a long-term contract showing that your performance before was really relevant for university. And it's an open call, of course.
So you consider that there should be separate tenure track positions, and it's not attached to all of the positions?
No, I think it's, well, I think that we have to then clarify what do we mean by tenure track. This is the long-term contract. That's it, isn't it? What else it is? I mean, and then as you said, so you are not able, if you are getting this tenure track, you are not able to take money directly from the contract. So you have your salary, okay? But you still are supposed to deliver, both in terms of funding, you have to attract money, you have your teaching load, and you have your administrative responsibilities. And that's what are basically these criteria which are being used to evaluate you every 6 or 5 years. And then as a professor, I think I mean, if you take university examples, we have cooperation with University of Denmark. And what I heard is like, the principle, everyone is teaching. I mean, it's like in university, everyone supposed to teach. Even if you are doing research and you are an assistant professor, you still need to do, do research, you still need to do teaching. And vice versa, if you're a professor, you still have dedicate some hours to teaching. And it could be maybe 5 hours, 4 hours per week, but I think this would, again, allow to bring more research into education.
Yeah, so basically, your model would be that if we talk about those shares, so you would have 50, let's say, without any importance of the numbers, but 50% of those who are on the tenure track, so to say, and 50% of those who can still collect different contracts, different positions. And that kind of, it would be, in a way, it would be this tenure track, and then it would be the current system side by side.
Yeah, and it gives a little bit more flexibility. And of course, if we go about changes, then the changes cannot be, I mean, like you have to destroy the system and then you put something completely new. There's a big probability of failure. So it's better if you have some kind of, let's say, the period when you you kind of merging the existing system with the new system. And for that, maybe you have these two kind of approaches, that you have this contract-based professor and the tenure-based professor.
Yeah, so you could have both of the systems also in the leading level. Yeah, sounds once again as a kind of innovative solution in a way. Yeah. Any other comments?
I see 2 comments in the chat box. Yeah, in the chat box, 2 comments from Agrita and Gunters, and they say that the framework should be the same for research institutions and the higher education institutions, not to drive the 2 research track and teaching track apart. Yeah, so the one framework, and Gunters is also supporting this view. He says that there are already many professors that do the main research activity in research institutions, and research institutions are an additional source of high-level academics. Therefore, the framework should be the same. I think that, yes, we are talking about one framework, but that comprises different models, different options within it.
And let's once again kind of thinking aloud and asking a question here again. So if you would have a tenure track professor in a research institution, so it would be teaching in higher education institution, or it could be research only. So just thinking aloud, so how you see it, the dynamics between these two types of institutions.
May I say? Right now, these systems are separate. That means that there exist in Latvia research institutes. They don't teach in general. They don't have students, or maybe only some PhD students from the universities. And of course, they do not have possibility to be a professor because they don't have rights to teach or to have study programs. Therefore, I think it should be discussed how we see the future of these institutes and this research staff in these institutes. There should be some transition period because right now they are separate like state research institutes, and it's not possible to say you are no professor there.
Yeah, that's kind of an important comment. And then there's also kind of even more abstract question whether both sectors should have all of the steps, so to say, that you can have PhD students, for instance, in both of the institutional types and the professors in both of the institutional types after the transition period, or whether only some parts of the framework are applicable to some institutions and the others to other institutions. I think both are kind of visions that can be done. So that's also kind of a question.
And maybe the dual employment is also an option. And I think there are some examples when the professor is, one person is a professor at university and he still works for the research institute. And then it's it's of course the question is the contracts and which is kind of tricky part, but I think that really, as it was mentioned, that there's a lot of good research in institutes, and we need really this knowledge so they can be this, that the research knowledge could be brought to the universities, to students. I think we are too small country just to do, just research or just do teaching. I mean, but really not. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
No,
my question then to yourself and Gunters and Agrita actually is whether this coexistence of two types of institutions, the universities on the one side and the research institutes, are serving you well, and whether you shouldn't consider, as it was done in Finland and Denmark, for instance, of merging most of the research institutes in the universities. And the other part of the question has to do with doctoral students. Given that I understood last time we were in Riga that there would be an implementation of doctoral reform that would give the universities a much greater responsibility for conferring the doctorate and being responsible for the doctorate. How would you see the interaction between yourself and the research institutes with respect to the doctoral students in the new, doctoral framework?
Excellent questions.
May I try to answer from my perspective? Yeah. So concerning the first part about research institutes and universities, I think we are already close to the stage where some of the research institutes are close to several universities. So merger is not obvious, and therefore we have some of professors working that do research in one institute working in several universities. So one in the University of Latvia, Riga Technical University, Riga Stadiņš University. So I think it's not obviously simple how that is done in this level. I think it's not a bad way to go for something similar to the French system, where you have this affiliation towards a lab from university. I guess Andre will correct me then, but I know that there are in CNRS labs, you have sometimes professors from several institutions, but okay.
It's true, but they have been trying for 40 years to get rid of all these divisions without succeeding. You know, this was my passing comment. But when you look at, for instance, the Excellence Initiative in France, it is meant to provide greater integration, because it's a lot of loss of resources and inefficiencies, in fact.
Sure. But I think especially for the largest research institutes, it's really not simple. Then it's more of the question of splitting them up, which I think is the worst thing to do in general. But yeah, so I think there are many problems, and this dual employment, I think, is the simplest thing that we could actually do even now, that you have a certain amount of research part of your full-time in an institute and part of your teaching hours or teaching part, professorship part in the universities. And that's something that the universities and institutes could agree on already now. But it's of course very difficult, and indeed having one institution is easier. But as you see, that the problems are obvious. Concerning the PhD students, I think the interaction between research institutes and universities is going to be very good, because you have already quite some representatives in the universities in the teaching staff part, and the training part that concerns research will be done in the research institutes for some of the PhD students. For some, it's the university. It depends on the place where their research part supervisor is. But the general skills training and everything else will be based in the university, which I think is okay. So I think in that sense, the reform in the PhD changes is in a good path. So let's hope for the result.
I think this idea of dual employment is really important, and there are kind of two different models or modalities of it. So one is the institutional one, in which they are the institutions that are agreeing about the use of the annual working time, and then there is finances flowing from institution to another. And then there's this kind of basket type of thinking, that it's an individual who is collecting different contracts from different institutions, and it can be something between 10 and 250% that you have the employment. So this is really an important discussion, whether it should be based on institutional agreements as a principle. Of course, there are always short contracts, that's for sure. But in principle, or whether it should be based on individual contracts with individual persons with different institutions. And I think this is really an important question.
If I may reply directly to this, I think we have this basket model at the moment, right? And then it's the people going around. But if we want to attract talent from abroad, either people that have emigrated for some time and did studies and come back, it's impossible for them to kind of come and try to get the basket full. So I think it's the institutional agreements that are necessary, or then integration, if we can make it happen in some magical way.
And I agree with Gunter's, because I'm at the university also responsible for strategy. And this is a question of a strategy of institutions. For example, you work in one institution, you have one aim, one strategy, and then you work in other, and it could be maybe not something against, but it could be different. So, and the question is, how to handle it. So how do you handle that the person works in two institutions with different strategies, with different priorities and the ways you evaluate their performance? So I think we are where we are, but this is I'm talking about this basket approach. This is one of the problems from managerial point of view, to employ, for example, person in several institutions, and they might even compete. So I think this is very challenging part, and then maybe institutional way, it's more sustainable. I don't know if we can do it, but now, but I think it's more sustainable.
Mm-hmm. I can't agree more with this comment. It's a very important one. It is because the basket model, the individual, the individual baskets limit your ability to manage as an institution and to be strategic.
It also often leads to a situation in which some persons have too much in their baskets and some persons have too little. And while if they would be combining the content of the basket, they would be all capable to actually develop within their careers. So this basket model is something that I also think it's quite problematic. So career system based on full-time employment would be something that I think is something that should be as one of the aims.
We have another raised hand, Agrita.
Yes, thank you. It was about the same question, whether the independent research institutions probably should be merged into, or with, not into, but with the universities. And we certainly at the RSU, we think that would be a good idea. However, I think we all are aware that it's almost impossible unless there is a vision and a political will to do it nationally and to put a substantial resources for those mergers. In parallel, I think this situation that we have at hand at the moment, when in our leading research institutes, researchers are also professors in our universities, I would say it's totally not a bad situation, because if we view those institutes as industry, like high added value industry that works for the industrial partners and bring the industrial capacity up, then I think it is a viable option as well. And again, maybe I look from the perspective of a university that is very strongly linked to the clinical profession and clinicians working as a professors too. And from that perspective, I see the benefit. But again, the basket thing and also sort of the challenges that it face for us, they are there. But then there was also a question about the doctorate. I think we are in a good stage right at the moment. We are discussing with the institutes the resource flow and the ways how we more transparently engage all sides in providing for the doctoral students and doing the work together.
There was also an important comment. Someone else was also kind of raising it, that there could be also this adjunct professor.
Yeah.
In a way or another. The private docents or like docents in Nordic countries, in that meaning that you have the right to teach on professorial level, but you are not employed. But then you may have, of course, hourly based contracts or so, but it can be also placed. Now there is only this POP, professor of practice, but there could be also adjunct professors that are not employees as such, but they do have the right to teach in a certain level. That might be one.
Yeah, I agree with you, Elias. And I don't know if you saw the comment in the chat box. It's actually saying what you just said, that there is a category of adjunct professor, which is similar to what Tal suggested about contract-based professors. And there are people whose main job could be in a research institution or industry. And then I got another comment that we should keep in mind. And I think that it refers also to a possibility to establish, let's say, new positions that maybe we are short. For example, position of research professor who has rights to supervise a doctoral dissertation, and this would give an option to those scientists and researchers who are working in the research institutions to do pedagogical work in the doctoral education. So this comment came from Riga Technical University, Lauris Bisenieks. So these are open questions and notes, and I see that our time is running out. So I don't know if we have time for any more comments, Diego.
No, thank you very much. No, I think we need to begin closing, so we respect the program. So thank you so much for this third session. I think it was very, very fruitful. Let's do the closing. So I guess that Dace would like to begin first.
Yes, hello to everyone. Tiešām man liels prieks par šodienas diskusiju. Vispirms milzīgs paldies Pasaules Bankas ekspertu komandai, kura veica iepriekšējo mēnešu laikā ļoti rūpīgu sagatavošanās darbu, lai tiešām mums būtu saturiski bagāts iesākums. Un tas, ka ir pacelti īstie jautājumi un liecina tas, ka arī klātesošie iesaistījās diskusijās. Un tas, ko es redzu, ka šis tiešām ir ļoti ambiciozs projekts. Tas ir sācies, un es tiešām mums visiem novēlu ciešā sadarbībā turpināt un nonākt pie pozitīva risinājuma, lai mēs varētu ieviest jaunu akadēmiskās karjeras modeli Latvijā, kurš tiešām integrētu zinātni, pētniecību, akadēmisko darbu vienotā sistēmā, un no tā būtu ieguvumi gan individiem, gan institūcijai, gan zinātnes un izglītības kvalitātei. Tā kā paldies par šo semināru un sadarbosimies turpmāk.
Thank you. Our colleague from the European Commission would like to close also.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, Agota.
Okay, so my name is Agota Kovács and I'm a colleague of Patricia. So I'm also working on the project on behalf of DG Reform. And I have been with you during this series of presentations, and it was a very, very interesting event. So I really enjoyed the discussions, and I also hope that you think the presentations and also the input provided by our teams was useful to trigger your discussion. And I'm also very, very happy that you participated to a large number and you engaged very actively. This is something that we would like to encourage you to continue as we go ahead with the implementation of the project. And I really think that today you lived up to our expectations of seizing this opportunity, of having an informed and sometimes even passionate discussion about a topic that is so dear to all of us. Again, higher education is a cornerstone of growth, but it can only, let's say, provide the results that you expect if you engage and if you shed new lights on shared challenges. So I thank you again, both for the host. I'm very, very grateful to the Latvian Ministry to having hosted this discussion, but also again to the World Bank, who was really professional in organizing this event and also keeping the time and managing it in a very, very efficient way. So I'm also grateful for all the content related input, and please keep up the good spirit. We will also be around to listen to your questions and also to provide the best answers possible from our side. So thank you again.
Thank you, Agota. I appreciate your kind words, and I endorse also the closing remarks from Dace. I totally agree with her. Let me finish with 2 minutes. 1 minute regarding some of the ideas that we have been discussing, but there are many, many, but at least 4 that I took a quick note, but again, there are more and we are going to share with you. But the first one is we discussed with the idea of the flexibility of the career framework, so to be adjusted to various institutional realities. Second, the importance of the flexibility of moving between different sectors, academic and private sector during one's career. The other important issue that was raised, it was the how to resolve legal issues related to the introduction of the tenure track system. And finally, components constituting workload in relation to the tripartite university mission, teaching, research, and service, and how to evaluate the importance and quality of each of them. These are some of the quick reactions. There are many more, and we are going to share with you. And finally, I would like to thank you all. Thank you, the Ministry of Education. Thank you all the participants. Really, it was a very real professional meeting. And I don't want to forget people that we are not seeing now, but they did a great job in terms of the IT people who allow us to do this. And also a big, big thanks to our colleague, Barbara. I don't know if she wants to appear or not, but she did a great job to go through all the slides. But again, to everybody, I think it was a great event. And as I said, I promise that this is just the first one, and we are going to continue. And all this process, we are going to finalize a report, but together with you, doing all the consultations that are appropriate for everybody. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.